She slammed her last coin onto the dirt road, pressed her boot over it, and walked away from it forever. No tears, no looking back. Just a woman with cracked hands, an empty stomach, and something burning in her chest that poverty had never managed to kill. She pushed open the gate of the most powerful ranch in Wyoming territory and asked for nothing but a chance to work. They laughed. He doubted. But by the time that first meal was finished, not a single person in that kitchen would ever forget her name. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew about strength, dignity, and what it truly means to belong somewhere. The coin was still warm from her palm when Eliza Whitmore pressed it into the Wyoming dirt and walked away from it. She did not kneel, she did not cry. She did not say a prayer over it like a burial, though some part of her understood that is exactly what it was, the burial of the last thing she had, that could be counted, weighed, and exchanged for something in this world. One coin. One miserable, worn-down coin that had survived the bank seizure, survived 3 weeks of sleeping in barns, survived 100 miles of walking and hitching rides on supply wagons with men who never once asked her name. And she left it in the dirt, because she refused to walk through those gates as a woman begging. She was going to walk through those gates as a woman offering something. There was a difference. And that difference was the only thing she still owned that no one could take. The Caldwell Ranch spread out before her like a kingdom, and that is exactly what it looked like in the brutal Wyoming summer of 1884. Thousands of acres of dry golden grass rolling out in every direction, cattle moving slow and heavy in the distance, fences running so far that the posts disappeared into the shimmer of the heat. A main house that was bigger than any building she had ever entered, with a long porch and shuttered windows and a stillness about it that felt less like peace and more like something that had simply forgotten how to be alive. She had heard about this ranch in every town between here and the collapsed remains of her family's property. Caldwell Ranch, people said, and they always said it the same way with a kind of respect that had fear underneath it, the way you might speak the name of a storm. Nathaniel Caldwell, 38 years old, owner of more land than most men would ever stand on in their entire lives. Known for paying fair wages and expecting absolute perfection in return. Known for being the kind of man who did not waste words on sentiment. Known, more than anything, for the fact that in all the years he had run that ranch, not a single person had ever once described him as warm. Successful? Yes, powerful without question. Warm? The people who worked for him would have laughed at the idea. Eliza had heard every version of this story. She had heard it from the ranch hand who gave her a ride on his supply wagon for 12 miles without charging her. She had heard it from a woman at a general store who looked at Eliza's worn dress and quietly slipped an extra biscuit into her bag without charging for it either. She had heard it from a drunk man outside a saloon who slurred that Caldwell was the kind of man who could freeze a river just by looking at it wrong. None of it scared her. She had already lost everything. What exactly was a cold man going to do to a woman who had already survived the worst? She straightened her back. She picked up her cloth bag which held one extra dress, a small bone-handled knife her father had given her when she was 8 years old, a tin cup, and a packet of dried herbs she had gathered herself along the road because old habits were the last things to die. And she walked through those gates. The first person she encountered was a ranch hand who was mending a section of fence near the entrance. He was young, maybe 19, with sun-browned skin and the kind of exhausted eyes that came from hard work started too early in life. He looked up when he heard her footsteps and stared at her, the way people had been staring at her for weeks. Like she was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. "Help you, miss," he said, though his tone made it clear he wasn't sure he wanted to. "I'm looking for whoever is in charge of hiring," Eliza said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which she was grateful for. "I'm looking for work, kitchen work, housekeeping, whatever needs doing." The boy, she already thought of him that way, though he probably would have hated it, blinked at her slowly. Then he looked over his shoulder toward the main house. Then he looked back at her. Then he did something she had seen 100 times in the past month and had learned to endure without flinching. He smiled, not kindly, the kind of smile that meant he was about to enjoy himself. "Lady," he said, "Mr. Caldwell's kitchen goes through more cooks than this ranch goes through horseshoes. Last one quit after 3 days, one before that lasted a week. And you," he let his eyes travel over her, her worn dress, her dusty boots, her cloth bag, all of it, in exactly the way she hated. "You don't look like the type who'd last a morning." "Then I suppose I'll surprise you," Eliza said. "Where do I find whoever does the hiring?" He stared at her for another moment, and she could see him deciding whether she was worth the trouble of an argument. Apparently she wasn't. He jerked his chin toward the main house. "Go around the back," he said. "Kitchen entrance. Ask for Mrs. Holt, she's the housekeeper. Or what's left of one." He turned back to his fence. "But don't say I didn't warn you." Eliza walked around to the back of the main house without another word. The kitchen entrance was a heavy wooden door propped open with a stone, and even from 10 feet away she could smell it, or rather she could smell the absence of what should have been there. A kitchen in the middle of the afternoon in summer should smelled like something. Bread or simmering meat, or at the very least the sharp, clean smell of a recently scrubbed surface. This kitchen smelled like neglect. She stepped inside. It was a large space, larger than the entire farmhouse she had grown up in, with a wide iron stove that had grease built up along its sides that spoke of weeks of careless cooking. A long wooden work table that was cluttered with equipment that had been put away wrong or not put away at all. And shelves that held supplies in a state of such disorder that she could see at a glance that things were going bad didn't need to be, and things were running out that could have been stretched further with half a thought. A woman was standing at the stove with her back to the door. She was maybe 60, with gray hair pinned up in a way that had been neat that morning, and was losing the battle against the heat of the day. She was stirring something that smelled Eliza, search for the diplomatic word, and couldn't find one. Unfortunate. "Mrs. Holt?" Eliza said. The woman turned around. Her face was the face of someone who had been managing too much for too long and had passed through exhaustion so completely that what remained on the other side was simply endurance. She looked at Eliza. She looked at the cloth bag. She looked at the worn dress. "Who are you?" she said, not unkindly, just directly. "Eliza Whitmore," Eliza said. "I'm looking for work. I can cook, keep house, manage supplies, care for livestock in a pinch. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I don't have any bad habits that would cost you trouble." She paused. "I'm also looking at your kitchen right now, and I can already see 5 things that are costing this ranch money they don't have to spend, and I'd be glad to fix them if you'll give me the chance to prove myself." Mrs. Holt was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 5 things. 5 things I can see from here," Eliza said. "I'm sure there are more." Another pause. The thing on the stove bubbled unhappily. "Mr. Caldwell doesn't hire drifters," Mrs. Holt said. "I'm not a drifter," Eliza said. "I'm a woman whose family's land failed and whose bank showed no mercy." "There's a difference." She kept her eyes steady on the older woman's face. "I'm not looking for sympathy, Mrs. Holt. I'm looking for a fair chance to work for fair wages. If I don't earn my keep in the first week, you can send me away, and I won't argue about it." Mrs. Holt studied her for a long moment. Then she turned back to the stove and moved the pot off the heat, which was the right decision, because whatever was in it was past saving, and she said, without turning around, "You'd have to speak to Mr. Caldwell himself. I don't make the hiring decisions." "I understand," Eliza said. "Can you arrange that?" "I can tell him you're here," Mrs. Holt said. "Whether he talks to you is his business." "That's all I'm asking." Mrs. Holt sent one of the younger workers to find Nathaniel Caldwell, and while they waited, she told Eliza to sit at the work table, which Eliza did. She set her cloth bag on the floor beside her feet and folded her hands on the table and waited. She was good at waiting. She had learned that from the frontier itself, which did not care about anyone's timeline. She was looking at the shelves while she waited, cataloging, organizing in her mind, calculating when the back door opened, and Nathaniel Caldwell walked into his kitchen for the first time in what she would later learn was several months. She had expected someone who looked powerful. She had not expected someone who looked that tired. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples, and the kind of weathered face that came from years of working land that didn't forgive carelessness. He had the build of a man who had done physical labor his whole life and hadn't stopped even after he had enough money to pay other people to do it for him. His clothes were working clothes, not the clothes of a man performing wealth for an audience. There was dried mud on his boots and a tear in the knee of his canvas trousers that had been mended and torn again. He looked at her with dark eyes that were not unkind exactly, but were not warm either. They were the eyes of a man who had been disappointed enough times that he had simply stopped expecting much of anything. "Mrs. Holt says you're looking for work," he said. "Yes, sir," Eliza said. She stood not because she was performing deference, but because she had been raised to stand when she spoke to someone she was asking something of. "Eliza Whitmore. I can cook, manage a household, keep accounts for supplies, and I learn whatever I don't know." "Where are you from?" "Larimer County originally. My family had a small farm, lost it 2 seasons back." He didn't offer sympathy. She hadn't asked for any. But she saw something move across his face, some brief recognition, before it settled back into its usual stillness. "I've had 6 cooks in the past 2 years," he said. Every one of them had references. Most of them had experience. None of them lasted. "I heard that," Eliza said. "Then why do you think you'd be different?" She thought about several answers and discarded all of them because they were all too small for what she actually meant. Then she decided to simply tell him the truth, because she had learned that truth, even when it was uncomfortable, tended to take up less space than performance. "Because I'm not here. Because this seemed like a good opportunity," she said. "I'm here because I have nowhere else to go, and I'm not willing to give up." "That's a different kind of reason, Mr. Caldwell. People who have options quit when things get hard." "I don't have the option of quitting." He looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was quiet, except for the sound of something dripping from a shelf that shouldn't have been dripping. "You said you saw problems in this kitchen," he said finally. "Yes, sir, tell me one." She glanced at the shelves. "Your salt pork on the second shelf from the top is against the wall where the moisture builds up in summer heat. In 2 weeks it'll be turning, and you'll lose the whole supply. Moving it to the far end of the bottom shelf would add 3 weeks to its life, easy." He looked at the shelf. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "What's the second thing?" "Your flour barrel has a crack in the lower seam. It's slow, but you're losing flour every day. The barrel needs to be replaced or at minimum lined with canvas on the inside. You're probably losing 2 pounds a week you're paying for and not getting." He was quiet again. His expression hadn't changed exactly, but something behind his eyes had shifted, a kind of attention that was different from the polite assessment he'd come in with. "Mrs. Holt," he said, without taking his eyes off Eliza, "did you know about the flour barrel?" "I knew there was something wrong with it," Mrs. Holt said carefully. "I wasn't sure what. 2 pounds a week," Eliza said. "You can check it yourself if you'd like." Nathaniel Caldwell was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "You'll start tomorrow. Mrs. Holt will show you where you'll sleep." Wages are, he named a number that was fair, not generous, not stingy. Fair, like a man who had calculated the correct value of a thing and had no interest in performing charity or exploitation. "That's acceptable," Eliza said. He nodded. He started to turn toward the door. And then she said something she had not planned to say, and would later wonder at the impulse that had driven it out of her. Mr. Caldwell looked at her. "The meal I'll be preparing tonight," she said. "What do you want?" He seemed faintly surprised by the question, as though people didn't often ask him what he wanted in a straightforward way. "Whatever you can manage," he said. "I eat simply." "That's not what I asked," she said quietly. He blinked. "I asked what you want," she repeated. "Is there something you liked eating? A long time ago, that you haven't had in a while. The kitchen was very still. She could see Mrs. Holt watching from the corner of her eye, something complicated moving across the older woman's expression. Nathaniel Caldwell looked at Eliza Whitmore for what felt like a very long time. And then something happened to his face that she didn't have a word for. Not softness, exactly, because it wasn't soft. More like a door, somewhere very deep inside of him, that had been locked shut for so long that the person on the other side of it had almost stopped believing anyone would ever knock. "My mother used to make a beef and root vegetable stew," he said. His voice was the same as it had always been, measured, controlled. But it was slightly quieter. With dried thyme, she grew it herself. "I can do that," Eliza said. "I'll need to look at what you have." He nodded once. He left, and Mrs. Holt let out a breath that seemed to have been sitting in her chest for about 10 years. Well, the older woman said softly, "I'll be." The first week nearly broke her. Not because the work was harder than she expected. She'd expect it to be hard, and it was, and she accepted that with the same grim practicality she applied to everything. The kitchen needed more than reorganization. It needed what amounted to a complete reconstruction of its systems and habits and the unconscious assumptions of everyone who worked in it. The ranch hands who came through the kitchen expected food to be there, expected it to be edible, and expected to take more than they needed without anyone saying anything, because no one had ever said anything. Eliza said something. The first incident happened on the third morning. A ranch hand, whose name she would later learn was Dallas Cooper, came into the kitchen before the breakfast service was properly set up, grabbed 2 full biscuits from the tray she had just pulled from the oven, and was heading back out the door when she said, clearly and without particular heat, "Those aren't served yet." He stopped, turned, looked at her with an expression of genuine surprise, as though a fence post had suddenly expressed an opinion. "I work here," he said. "I know you do," she said. "And breakfast is served at 6:30, same as it will be every morning from here on. If you're at the table at 6:30, you'll have more than 2 biscuits. If you come through the kitchen before that, you'll be putting them back." He stared at her. She looked back at him with an expression that was entirely calm and entirely unmovable. "Those biscuits are already in my hand," he said. "They are," she agreed. "And you're going to put them back on the tray." And in approximately, she glanced at the clock on the wall. 47 minutes. You can have as many as you like. He was bigger than her. He was younger than her. He had spent his adult life working for a man who was one of the most powerful in the territory, and he was not accustomed to being told what to do by a woman he had never seen before, in a kitchen he had been walking through for 3 years. He put the biscuits back. He didn't slam them down. He set them back on the tray with a kind of forced carefulness that was its own form of aggression, and then he walked out without another word. That afternoon, she heard from Owen Mercer, the young ranch hand from the gate who had become, despite his own best intentions, somewhat fascinated by her, that Dallas Cooper had gone to some of the other hands and complained loudly about the new woman in the kitchen, acting like she owns the place. She heard that, and she filed it away, and she kept working. The second incident happened on the 5th day. Victor Harland arrived. She didn't know who he was when she first saw him, only that he had ridden up to the main house on a horse that cost more than most people in the territory earned in a year, and that he had the kind of face she had learned to recognize over the years. Prosperous and predatory and charming in a way that was a performance rather than a nature. He was shown into the main sitting room to wait for Nathaniel, and she was asked to bring refreshments, which she did, coffee, and the small sugar cakes she had made that morning, which were better than anything that had come out of that kitchen in a long time, and she knew it, though she would have bitten her own tongue before saying so out loud. When she came into the sitting room with the tray, Harland looked at her the way men like him often looked at women in service positions, as though she were furniture that had been arranged for his convenience. "Well," he said pleasantly, "I see Caldwell's finally found someone who knows what she's doing in a kitchen." "You're new." "Yes, sir," she said, and set the tray on the table without elaboration. "Where are you from, sweetheart?" She disliked that word from men she had not given permission to use it. She kept her expression neutral. Larimer County, originally, she said. Is there anything else you need? Just making conversation, Harlan said and smiled. It was a practiced smile, the kind that had probably worked on a great many people. I'm Victor Harland. I have the ranch east of here. You'll be seeing me around. Yes, sir, she said again. She left. In the kitchen doorway, she paused for just a moment, and something in her chest tightened in a way she did not entirely understand yet. She had met men like Victor Harland before. She could not have explained exactly what it was that she recognized, the way you could not always explain how you knew a storm was coming before the clouds arrived. Something in the set of his shoulders, the quality of his attention. The way he had looked at the room at Nathaniel's room, in Nathaniel's house, with a kind of ownership that had no legal claim behind it yet. She went back to her kitchen. She made a mental note. It was on the 9th evening that the first real conversation happened. She had not been counting the days deliberately, but she would remember later that it was 9 days in, because 9 days was the length of the longest any previous cook had lasted. And she had overheard one of the older ranch hands mention it the day before, and she had thought, well then, let's find out what 10 looks like. She had been awake since before 5 in the morning. The bread she was making for the next day was the last thing left, and her hands moved through the familiar motions: flour, water, salt, yeast that she had started herself because the dried yeast in the supply cabinet was old, and she didn't trust it, and the kitchen was quiet and warm and smelled, finally, the way a kitchen should smell. She heard footsteps on the back porch, then the door opened, and Nathaniel Caldwell walked in. He looked the way he always looked after a long day, his hat pushed back, his face carrying the specific exhaustion of a man who had been solving problems that didn't stop generating two problems. His shirt damp with the sweat of the day that hadn't yet dried. He stopped when he saw her, and for a moment, something crossed his face that might have been guilt. I didn't know you'd still be up, he said. Almost done, she said. Another hour for the second rise. He stood in the doorway for a moment, in the way of a man who wasn't sure whether he was intruding, or whether the room he was standing in belonged to him, which she found faintly interesting given that it did, technically, belong to him. You should rest, he said. She pressed the heels of her hands into the dough and felt it respond elastic and alive and warm. I'll rest when it's in the pan, she said. He didn't leave. She glanced up at him, and he was looking around the kitchen with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not quite nostalgia, not quite approval. Something between the two that didn't have a clean name. It's different, he said. The kitchen, yes. She considered that. Things were disorganized, she said. Disorganized things tend to get worse. Food spoils faster. Supplies run short without warning. People take shortcuts because shortcuts are easy when no one's paying attention. I was paying attention, he said quietly, and there was something in his voice that told her. He knew that wasn't entirely true, that the ranch had his attention, the cattle and the land and the fences and the financial records, all of it. But the kitchen had existed in the kind of managed neglect that happened, when something was essential but not interesting. I know, she said, and she kept her voice gentle, because she was not trying to make him feel bad. You were paying attention to everything else. There's a lot of everything else on a ranch this size. He was quiet. She shaped the dough into its pan and set it aside. Can I ask you something, she said. He looked at her. Go ahead. How long since there's been anyone in this house who not worked here, she said carefully, searching for the right way to put it. But actually lived here. Not just maintained it, but made it feel like a place someone wanted to be in. The silence stretched out. She thought for a moment that she had crossed a line, spoken too familiarly, asked something that was not her business. She was ready to apologize and redirect, but then he said quietly, my mother. She passed in 79. I'm sorry, she said. And she meant it not in the performed way people offered condolences at a distance, but in the direct way of someone who understood what it meant to lose the person who had made a place a home. She was the one who made this ranch, he said. Not in the financial sense. My father did that, and I continued it. But she was the one who made it something people wanted to come back to. He paused. The stew you made the first night, yes? It was the first time I'd eaten it since she died, he said. I hadn't thought about it before you asked. But you asked and I told you, and then I ate it and He stopped. Seemed to find the admission difficult. I'd forgotten what it felt like. To sit at my own table and feel like I was home. She looked at him across the kitchen, and she kept her expression steady because she didn't want him to see that she was moved by that. Not because she was afraid of being moved, she wasn't. But because he had offered something private, and the right response to something private was to receive it quietly. That's what food is supposed to do, she said softly. It's not about impressing anyone. It's about making people feel they're not forgotten. He looked at her for a long moment. You said something like that, he said. The first night. I believe it, she said. Where did that come from? She was quiet for a moment, her hand still resting on the edge of the pan. My mother used to say it, she said at last. We didn't have much. Some years we didn't have enough. But she always said that a meal made with attention was a way of telling the people eating it that their lives mattered. That someone had taken time for them. She paused. I used to think it was just a pretty thing to say. Then we lost everything and people stopped making time for us, and I realized she had been telling me something true. The kitchen was very still. Nathaniel Caldwell looked at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Not the measuring calculation of their first meeting. Not the controlled distance he maintained with his workers. Something more unguarded than either of those things. What happened, he asked. She told him. Not all of it that would have taken all night, and cost her more than she was willing to spend on a 9th evening in a new place. But the shape of it, the farm that had been in her family for 20 years. The drought that came and didn't leave, the bank that extended credit and then called it in before the recovery came. The way the people in her town, the ones her family had known for decades, had quietly stopped coming around when there was nothing left to share. The worst part wasn't losing the land, she said. The worst part was losing the feeling that we had ever mattered to anyone. Like our lives only had value when we had something to offer. He was very still across from her. I know what that feels like, he said finally. And the quiet way he said it, without elaboration, without the kind of self-pity that asked for response, told her that he meant something by it that he was not going to explain tonight. She did not push. Some things needed more than 9 days to earn. Get some rest, Mr. Caldwell, she said. I'll have breakfast ready at 6. He nodded. He moved toward the door. He stopped. Eliza, he said the first time he had used her given name, said you saw 5 things wrong with this kitchen the first day. Yes, you've fixed the flour barrel and the salt pork, he said. And I've noticed about 6 other things that have changed. What were numbers 3 through 5? She allowed herself a small smile. You'll see, she said. By the time you notice them, they'll already be fixed. He stood there for a moment longer, and there was something in his face that was so close to a smile that she almost caught it before he turned away. The door closed behind him. She stood alone in her kitchen. She was already thinking of it as her kitchen, which was either confidence or delusion, and she refused to decide which, and she let herself feel, just for a moment, the thing she had been carrying for the past 9 days without looking at it directly. She was not saved, she was not safe. A man offering her fair wages and a place to sleep was not the same thing as belonging somewhere. She knew that. She had been poor long enough and alone long enough to know the difference between a foothold and solid ground. But for the first time, in longer than she could account for, she was in a place where the work she did changed something real. The bread was rising in its pan. The kitchen was organized and clean, and smelled like a place where people were cared for. And somewhere in the main house, a man who had eaten a simple stew and been reminded of his mother had looked at her without measuring her worth against what she owned or who she came from. It wasn't much, but Eliza Whitmore had learned, in the hardest possible way, that the people who survived were not the ones who waited for enough. They were the ones who took what little they had and treated it like it mattered. She dried her hands. She checked the bread. She turned down the lamp. She went to her small room off the kitchen, modest, clean, a window that looked out at the Wyoming dark, and she lay down on the narrow bed with her cloth bag on the floor beside her, the bone-handled knife inside it, the dried herbs still carrying their faint, clean smell. She thought about the coin she had left in the dirt at the gate. She thought, not today. Today I earned something. Tomorrow I'll earn something more. She closed her eyes. Outside, the Wyoming territory spread out under a sky full of stars that were indifferent to everything beneath them, and the cattle moved slow in the dark, and somewhere a coyote called once and went quiet. Inside the kitchen of the Caldwell Ranch, the bread rose in its pan, and the air smelled like something that had been missing for a long time and had quietly, without announcement, decided to come home. The bread she had made that first night was gone by 6:15 in the morning. Not because the ranch hands were being careless or greedy, though some of them were, and she had already catalogued which ones, but because it was good bread. Real bread. The kind that reminded a person's body of something it had been missing, without knowing it was missing it. She stood at the stove and watched them eat and said nothing, because that was not the moment for saying anything. The moment for saying something would come. Everything had its moment if you were patient enough to wait for it. Owen Mercer, the young hand from the gate, the one who had warned her away on her first day, with that practiced condescension that belonged to a much older man, came back for a third piece and stopped himself with his hand already reaching for it. He looked up and found her watching him, and something in her expression made him pull his hand back. "Sorry," he said, which surprised her. "Don't apologize," she said. "Eat it. That's what it's for." She paused. "But next time you want a third piece, come through the kitchen door and ask me first, so I know how much to make." He blinked at her. "Why does it matter if you know?" "Because right now I don't know how many people are eating 3 pieces," she said. "So I'm guessing, and when I guess wrong, someone goes without. And that person is usually the youngest one at the table, because young men don't fight for their share the way older ones do." She looked at him steadily. "Is that you? Are you the one who goes without?" His jaw tightened. "Sometimes," he said very quietly. "Then tell me," she said. "So I can make enough." He didn't say anything else, but she noticed that afternoon he came to the kitchen door while she was working and stood there for a moment, and when she looked up he said, "4 of us usually eat more than the others. Dallas, me, Samuel Briggs, and Pete Larson." She noted it without comment, and he left, and she adjusted her quantities for the following morning. It was such a small thing, she knew that. But she had been learning her whole life, really, and the hard years had simply sharpened the lesson that the small things were what people actually remembered. Not grand gestures, not speeches. The fact that someone had paid attention to what they needed before they had had to ask for it. That was what her mother had meant. She carried that thought with her through the rest of the morning and into the afternoon, when the real test arrived. It came in the form of Samuel Briggs. She had heard about Samuel Briggs before she ever spoke to him directly. He was 61 years old. He had worked on the Caldwell Ranch for 22 years, which meant he had worked there before Nathaniel took over from his father. Which meant that, in his mind and in the minds of most of the other hands, he was something close to an institution. He had his ways of doing things. He had his opinions about how a ranch ran. He had lived through 6 cooks in 2 years and had outlasted all of them without any apparent distress, which told her something about his relationship with the kitchen. He did not rely on it. He had learned to exist around its failures, which meant he was not accustomed to being asked to change. He came into the kitchen at noon on the 10th day carrying a saddle that needed a buckle replaced, which had nothing to do with the kitchen, and set it on the work table without asking. She looked at the saddle. She looked at him. He was a large man, not fat but broadly built, with a white beard kept shorter than it wanted to grow, and eyes the pale gray of early morning cloud cover. "I use this table when it's free," he said, answering a question she had not yet asked. "It's not free at noon," she said pleasantly. "I'm in the middle of the midday meal prep." "I can see that," he said. "I won't be long, Mr. Briggs," she said, and made sure her voice stayed easy. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to move the saddle. This table is for food preparation. Saddle leather and buckle oil on a food surface is a health problem, not a preference. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. He picked up the saddle. There a place you'd like me to take it? He asked. And the fact that he was asking rather than simply leaving was something she filed away carefully as more significant than it appeared. The bench by the east wall of the barn is usually clear in the afternoon, she said. Better light out there anyway. He left without another word. But he came back 20 minutes later without the saddle and stood in the doorway in the way of a man who had something to say and was deciding whether to say it. Nathaniel's mother used to run this kitchen, he said finally. I know, Eliza said. She was chopping onions real, proper knife work, the kind her mother had drilled into her, which produced even cuts that cooked uniformly rather than the ragged chunks that burned on the outside before they were tender in the middle. She ran it a certain way, he said. Most women who know what they're doing have a certain way, Eliza said. He was quiet for a moment. She had a pot of something on that stove almost every hour of the day, he said. You'd walk in here any time, and there'd be something going. Smelled like. He stopped, started again. It smelled like something. I know, she said again. I'm working on it. He watched her chop for another moment. You're not half bad with a knife, he said. No, she agreed, I'm not. He almost smiled. She caught the edge of it before he turned away. That afternoon, she started a bone broth from the leftover joints she had found in the back of the cold storage, good bones, wasted because no one had thought to do anything with them. She set it to simmer low and slow, the way her mother had taught her, with a bay leaf and a handful of dried thyme from her own packet, because the kitchen's dried herbs were too old to be worth much. By 4 o'clock, the kitchen smelled like something. Samuel Briggs walked through the backyard twice more that afternoon, not stopping, but she noticed that he slowed down both times when he passed the open door. The real trouble started on the 12th day. Dallas Cooper came to find her. Not at mealtime, not through the kitchen door. He came around the side of the house while she was hanging the kitchen linens on the line. And he had 2 other ranch hands with him, men she recognized by face, but whose names she had not yet learned, and his expression was the expression of a man who had decided that a conversation was going to go a certain way and had done the mental work in advance of making sure it did. I need to talk to you, he said. Go ahead, she said. She did not stop hanging the linens. The men are having a problem, he said. What men? The hands, the crew. He gestured loosely behind him. We don't like the new rules. She finished pinning a cloth to the line before she responded. Which rules specifically? The breakfast time, the kitchen access. The whole... He seemed to find it difficult to articulate, which told her that the problem was less about the rules themselves and more about the principle behind them. We've been working here years before you showed up, and we don't need some woman who's been here 5 minutes telling us how things go. She turned to look at him. She was aware that the 2 men behind him were watching her carefully. She was aware that whatever she did in the next 30 seconds was going to establish something that would be very difficult to re-establish later. Mr. Cooper, she said, how many times have you gone to the supply room in the last 2 weeks to get something you needed and found it was out? He blinked. What? The supply room, she said. How many times have you needed something? Lamp oil, patching cloth, extra rope, whatever, and it wasn't there because someone else had taken more than they needed, and no one had tracked it. He shifted. More than a few, she said. I've kept a record. In the 12 days I've been here, the main supply room ran short on 5 items that should not have run short on a ranch this size. Salt once, patching canvas once. Hardtack biscuits for the night riders 3 times. She kept her voice even. Do you know why? He didn't answer. Because no one was paying attention, she said. Not to you, not against you. Just no one was watching what went where, and when it ran out, the people who needed it most went without. She paused. I'm not making rules to make your life harder, Mr. Cooper. I'm making rules so that this ranch stops wasting what it has. And you are directly benefiting from that, whether you want to admit it or not. The two men behind him exchanged a glance. Dallas Cooper stared at her. "The breakfast time," he said. "That's the real one. 6:30 is too late for men who start work before 5. "Then I'll start serving at 5:45, she said immediately. "Tell me by tonight what time works and I'll adjust." "That's a reasonable thing to ask for. I didn't know your schedule when I set the time." "Now I do." He had nothing left to argue with. She watched him work through that fact in real time, which was almost uncomfortable to observe. "Fine," he said. "Fine," she agreed. He left. The two men behind him followed, and one of them, she caught it from the corner of her eye, glanced back at her with an expression that was not exactly respect, but was tilting slowly in that direction. She went back to her linens. Her hands were completely steady. She had learned, over the years, that there were two kinds of confrontations. The ones that were about what they said they were about, and the ones that were about something else entirely. Dallas Cooper's problem was not the breakfast time. His problem was that a woman with nothing to her name had and immediately begun changing things, and that implied that things had needed changing, which implied that the people who had been doing those things had been doing them wrong, and that was the thing that no one could easily accept. She could not fix that by arguing with him. She could only fix it by being right, consistently, over time, until being right became more important than being comfortable. She had time. She intended to use it. The next twist came from a direction she had not fully anticipated, though she would tell herself afterward that she should have seen it sooner. It was on the 15th day that Victor Harland came back. She was in the kitchen when she heard his horse in the yard, and she moved to the window and watched him dismount with the practiced ease of a man who was very comfortable arriving at other people's property. And something tightened in her chest again, the same thing she had felt the first time, the weather sense that didn't have a name. He came in through the front of the house this time, shown in by the young houseboy, and she heard his voice carrying from the front room, the pleasant, easy voice of a man who had learned to make people comfortable because comfortable people were easier to manage. She went back to her work. An hour later, Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway. She noticed this immediately, the way he looked when he had been in a difficult conversation that had not gone the way he'd intended. There was a tension in the line of his shoulders that was different from the usual exhaustion of hard work. "I need your assessment of something," he said. She looked up from the dough she was working. "All right, Harlan wants to buy the eastern pasture. The section that runs along the creek." He said it carefully, like a man laying out a problem he already had an opinion about, but wanted a second pair of eyes on. "He's offering a fair price. Is it a fair pasture?" she asked. He paused. "It's the best water access on the ranch," he said. "Then it's not a fair price," she said, "whatever he's offering. Water access on dry land is worth more than any fixed price you can put on it today, because next year it might be worth 3 times that, and the year after that even more." He looked at her. "You know land values. I know what my family lost when we lost our water rights," she said. "Same thing. Seemed like a reasonable transaction at the time. Cost us everything 2 seasons later when the drought came." She kept her hands working in the dough, though. "Why does he want that specific section?" Nathaniel was quiet. "That's the question, isn't it?" she said. "Not a question." "He says he wants to expand his grazing," Nathaniel said slowly. "He has enough land for twice his current herd," she said. "I asked Owen Mercer about it after Harlan's last visit." Owen grew up near the Harlan property. Nathaniel went very still. "You were asking about Harlan. I noticed something the first time he came here," she said. "I don't always know what I'm noticing until I know more." "What did you notice?" She thought about how to say it. "He looked at your house," she said carefully. "The way some men look at things they've decided are going to be theirs." The silence that followed that statement was a different quality than the silences she had become accustomed to in this kitchen. It had weight. "He's been buying up smaller properties east of here," Nathaniel said slowly. 3 ranches in the past 18 months. "And if he gets your eastern pasture," she said, "he controls the water for all of them." Nathaniel stood in her kitchen doorway with the expression of a man who had just had something explained to him, that he had known on some level, but had not wanted to look at directly. "I haven't agreed to anything," he said. "Good," she said simply. "Don't." He was quiet for another long moment. "Then why do you care?" She looked up at him, her hands still in the dough. "Because I work here," she said, "and this ranch takes care of people. Not just you, Owen, and Samuel, and the night riders, and Mrs. Holt and the 12 other families that depend on the wages from this property." She paused. "If Harlan controls the water, he controls this ranch. And men like Harlan don't control things to take care of the people in them." He looked at her for a long time. "You figured all that out from one conversation where he called you sweetheart," he said. "I figured all that out from 22 years of watching what happens when powerful men decide they want something that belongs to someone else," she said. And the quiet force of that statement was enough that he didn't say anything in return. He left to go back to Harlan. He turned down the offer. She heard about it from Owen, who had been in the yard and overheard enough to get the shape of it. Harlan had pushed. Nathaniel had held firm. Harlan had left with the pleasant smile still in place and something much colder underneath it. "He's not going to like that," Owen said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with the specific energy of a young man delivering news he wasn't sure was good. "No," she said, "he's not. Does that worry you?" She considered the honest answer. "Yes," she said. "But being worried about the right things is different from being afraid of the wrong ones." Owen stared at her. He was 19 years old, and she reminded herself 26, which was only 7 years older, but it felt like a larger gap than that, the gap of a particular kind of experience rather than simple time. "You knew he was trouble the first time he came," Owen said. "I suspected," she corrected. "There's a difference." "How'd you know?" "I didn't know," she said again patiently. "I paid attention. There's a difference between those two." Owen was quiet for a moment, leaning in the doorway in the specific way of a young man who wanted to stay in the conversation, but wasn't sure he had anything left to add to it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You've been standing in that doorway for 10 minutes, she said. "Go ahead. Why did you pick here?" he said, "when you left wherever you left from?" "Why here, Caldwell Ranch, I mean. Most people who need work go to town first." She was quiet for a moment, pressing her hands flat against the work table. "Because I heard that the man who ran this ranch was fair," she said. "Hard, cold, difficult, all of those things, but fair. And when you have nothing, fair is the rarest thing in the world." She looked at him. "Are you from somewhere you had to leave?" He looked away. "Doesn't matter. It always matters," she said. "It's just not always time to say so yet." He didn't answer that, but he also didn't leave, and eventually she handed him a knife and a pile of carrots and put him to work, and they worked in companionable quiet for a while, and that was its own kind of conversation. 3 days after Harlan's rejected offer, the rumors started. She heard them first from Mrs. Holt, who came to her in the early evening with the careful expression of a woman delivering unwelcome information she felt obligated to deliver. "People in town are talking," Mrs. Holt said. Eliza continued what she was doing, which was sorting the dried bean supply by quality, discarding the ones that had gone too old to be worth cooking. "About what?" "About you," Mrs. Holt said. "About you and Mr. Caldwell." She put down the beans she was holding. "What are they saying?" "That you're a woman in your position, working in a wealthy man's household, Mrs. Holt seemed to find the actual words difficult. "There are people suggesting that your influence here is not entirely professional." Eliza was quiet. She had known this was coming, had known it in the way you knew winter was coming, not the exact date, but the direction of things, the steady gathering of something that had been predictable since the start. A woman alone, working in a powerful man's home, changing things, earning his trust. There were always going to be people who could not look at that without attaching the most reductive story they could find to it. "Who's saying it?" she asked. Mrs. Holt hesitated. "There are several people. But the stories seem to be starting from another hesitation." From the Harlan direction, something went cold and clear in her chest. "Of course they are," she said quietly. "Eliza misses." Holt said, and her voice had dropped, had become the voice of one woman talking to another, not a housekeeper to a cook. "I need to tell you that I believe none of it. Not one word. But you need to understand what this could mean for you." "If your reputation, I know what it means," Eliza said. "You could lose your position here. Even if Mr. Caldwell doesn't believe it, the pressure." "I know," she said again. She kept her voice level. She had not worked this hard and come this far to let herself unravel now, here in front of a woman who was trying to help her. "Thank you for telling me. What are you going to do?" She picked up the beans again, went back to sorting. "Keep working," she said. Mrs. Holt stared at her. "That's your plan. My plan," Eliza said, "is to do my work so well, and so consistently, and so visibly, that the people saying these things eventually have to decide whether they trust their own eyes or someone else's story. Most people, given enough time, will trust what they can actually see." She paused. "The people who won't aren't going to be convinced by anything I do anyway, so there's no point wasting energy on them." Mrs. Holt was quiet for a long moment. Then she said very softly, "She would have liked you." "Nathaniel's mother." Eliza kept sorting beans. "Tell me about her," she said. Because she understood that the way to honor something was to want to know it. And Mrs. Holt pulled up a chair, and in the warm kitchen that smelled like broth and herbs, she talked about the woman who had built this place into a home, and Eliza listened with the full weight of her attention, and filed away every word like a map of somewhere she had not yet been but intended to find her way to. Nathaniel heard about the rumors on a Tuesday. She knew because she heard him on Wednesday morning, before she had even started the fire in the stove, having a conversation in the yard with one of the older ranch hands, his voice controlled and low, but with an edge in it that she had not heard there before. She did not go to the window. She started the fire. She put the water on. She began her morning work because that was what she was there to do. And she was not going to let Harlan or his rumors or anyone else's small cruelties reduce her to the kind of woman who stood at windows waiting to see what men were going to decide about her life. When Nathaniel came into the kitchen, she had the coffee ready. She handed him a cup without comment. He took it. He stood at the table and drank half of it without speaking. And she continued her work, and the kitchen was quiet in the way it had learned to be quiet, not awkward, not strained, but the productive quiet of two people who had gotten used to each other's presence. Then he said, "You've heard." "Yes," she said. "I want you to know." "Mr. Caldwell," she said quietly, and he stopped. She turned to look at him. "I know what you're going to say, and I appreciate it. But I need you to understand something." She kept her voice steady. "If you defend me publicly because you feel to have to, it will look like you're confirming that there's something to defend. And it will cost you more than it costs me." He stared at her. "You're telling me not to say anything. I'm telling you that the best thing you can do is to continue treating me exactly the same way you have been," she said. "Not warmer, not colder, exactly the same. Because the story Harlan is telling only has power if we react to it." "And if we don't react, it just goes away?" "No," she said honestly. "It won't go away on its own, but it will lose its fuel. And in the meantime, I'll keep doing my work, and the work will speak more clearly than any denial either of us could make." He looked at her for a long time. "You're not afraid," he said. She almost laughed. "I'm terrified," she said. "I've built something here. I have more to lose than you do." She held his gaze. "But I've been afraid before and kept working, and I'm going to do the same thing now." Nathaniel set down his coffee cup. "Harlan is coming for more than your reputation," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know," she said. "He wants the eastern pasture. He's not going to stop wanting it. I know that too. And I think," he paused, selected his words with the care of a man who did not use them carelessly, "I think he's found something, or manufactured something. There are land records that—" He stopped again. "I'm having trouble locating certain documents. Deeds, survey records from the original filing." The kitchen went very quiet. "Not the good kind of quiet. When did you notice they were missing?" she asked. Last week, he said. I thought I'd misfiled them. But I've been through every box in the study, and they're gone. She thought about Victor Harland arriving at this house with his easy smile and his expensive horse, being shown into the sitting room to wait, being left alone while the houseboy went to find Nathaniel. When did Harland last visit, she asked. He looked at her. She watched him make the same calculation she had just made and arrive at the same answer. 3 weeks ago, he said. His voice was very quiet. The sitting room, she said. Your study is off the sitting room. The silence between them had a different quality now. The shape of a thing that had just become visible. He took them, Nathaniel said. Or someone who works for him did, she said. Either way, the original filing records are with the county. They have to be. Wyoming territory law requires a... She paused. Do you know anyone at the county office? He nodded slowly. Then that's the first thing, she said. Before anything else. Before any conversation with Harlan, before any public statement, before anything, you need to know what you actually have in your name. She looked at him steadily. Because if he's already moved on the records, you need to know what he changed and what can be proven. He stared at her. How do you know to think about it like this? He said. Because it's exactly what happened to my father, she said. And the words came out flat and simple and final, like a door closing on a room she had spent years trying not to go back into. Not this specific thing, but the shape of it. A powerful man who wanted something that belonged to someone who couldn't fight back. And by the time my father understood what was happening, it was already done. She turned back to the stove. I'm not going to let that happen here, she said. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a speech. It was just a statement of fact, delivered in the voice of a woman who had made her decision long before this moment and was only now saying it out loud. Nathaniel Caldwell stood in his kitchen on a Wednesday morning, with half a cup of cold coffee, and the sudden, startling understanding that the woman he had hired to cook his meals was possibly the most capable person currently standing on his property. He put the cup down. I'll ride to the county office this morning, he said. Go before noon, she said. The clerk leaves early on Wednesdays. He almost stopped to ask her how she knew that. Then he decided that when a person consistently knew things that were useful, the right response was not to question it but to be grateful for it. He went. She watched him ride out from the kitchen window and then went back to her work, methodical, steady, the way she always did everything. And the thing she was carrying in her chest, the cold, tight thing that had been there since Mrs. Holt told her about the rumors, loosened just slightly. Not because the danger was past, because someone was riding toward it rather than away from it. Owen appeared in the doorway at mid-morning, which had become something of a habit for him over the past 2 weeks. Mr. Caldwell rode out early, he said. Yes, she said. Something wrong? She looked at him. He was young and earnest, and the quality of his worry was genuine in the way of someone who had come to care about a place he had not expected to care about. Something is being handled, she said. He accepted that. Then Dallas Cooper told me this morning that he thinks you should leave, he said. Before it gets worse. The rumors, she looked at him. What do you think, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I think this kitchen has never been like this in the time I've been here, he said. I think Samuel Briggs smiled at breakfast 2 days ago, and nobody under 30 has ever seen him smile before. He paused. And I think the people saying you should leave, mostly the same people who laughed when you walked in the gate. She looked at this 19-year-old boy with his honest face and his cautious hope, and something in her chest did something complicated. Keep watching, she said. Pay attention. That's all you have to do right now. He nodded. She handed him a basket of vegetables and put him to work again, and they worked together in the kitchen that smelled like something and sounded like something. And outside, the Wyoming territory continued doing what it had always done, being vast and indifferent and entirely uninterested in the small human dramas playing out beneath its enormous sky. But inside this kitchen, something was being built. Slowly, stubbornly, one meal and one honest conversation and one refused defeat at a time. And Eliza Whitmore, who had buried her last coin in the dirt at the gate and walked away from it without looking back, kept working. Because that was what she did. It was all she had ever done. And she had learned, in the hardest possible school there was, that it was enough. Nathaniel came back from the county office at 4 in the afternoon, and she knew before he even dismounted that something had gone wrong. She knew it the way she knew weather now, not from one sign but from the accumulation of small things. The way he sat in the saddle, the particular stillness of his shoulders. The fact that he didn't hand the reins to Owen, who was standing ready in the yard, but tied them himself, which was what he did when he needed the extra 30 seconds to think. She had the coffee ready when he walked through the kitchen door. He took it. He sat down at the work table the first time he had sat in her kitchen rather than standing in the doorway, and he put both hands around the cup and was quiet for a long moment. She waited. "The records are there," he said. She felt the first breath of relief. "But they've been amended," he said. The relief stopped. "Amended how?" she said. He looked up at her. His eyes had the quality of a man who had spent the past 4 hours being very controlled about something that deserved a much less controlled response. The Eastern Pasture Boundary Survey, the original filing from 1871, shows the creek as the eastern boundary of my property. The amended record, he stopped. The amended record shows the boundary stopping 40 yards west of the creek. She stared at him. "That's not a clerical error," she said. "No," he said, "it is not. Who filed the amendment?" "The clerk couldn't tell me, or wouldn't." He set the cup down. "The amendment was filed 6 weeks ago, 2 weeks before Harlan first came here talking about buying the eastern pasture." She sat down across from him, which was also something she had not done before. But the moment seemed to have outgrown the usual arrangements of employer and employee. "He moved the boundary on paper first," she said. "Then he came to offer to buy it. So if you'd sold it, you'd have sold him not just the pasture but the creek, and the deed would have shown a boundary that put the creek in his name, and your own copy of the amended record would have confirmed it." "Yes," Nathaniel said, "and if you hadn't sold it." "He could still go to court, claiming the creek was never legally mine," Nathaniel said. Using the amended record as his evidence, the kitchen was very quiet. "He planned this for months," she said, "at least." She looked at her hands flat on the work table. She thought about the Harlan she had seen in this house, the easy smile, the pleasant voice, the way he had looked at the room. She thought about her father. She thought about the bank officer who had come to their farm with paperwork. Her father didn't fully understand, speaking in the careful, practiced language of men who had done this many times before. "The original 1871 survey," she said. "Is there any other copy? Anything outside the county office?" Nathaniel looked at her. Something shifted in his expression. "My father's records," he said slowly. "He kept copies of everything. Every deed, every survey, every filing. There are boxes in the cellar I haven't opened in years." She stood up. "Show me." He stared at her for a moment. "Now?" he said. "Right now," she said. The cellar was under the main house, access through a door in the floor of the study that she had never been in before. Nathaniel lit a lamp and led the way down the narrow stairs, and she followed, and the air down there was cool and dry and smelled of old paper and cedar, which was the smell of things that had been deliberately preserved by someone who understood their value. There were 6 wooden crates stacked along one wall, each labeled in a careful hand that she understood immediately was not Nathaniel's his handwriting she had seen on supply orders, blocky and functional, but his father's, which was precise and deliberate in the way of someone who had been educated to believe that record-keeping was a moral responsibility. "He organized everything by year," Nathaniel said, running his hand along the labels. "Then 1871 is this one," she said, moving to the correct crate without hesitating. He helped her lift the lid. The documents inside were wrapped in oilcloth, which was the right way to store paper in a climate like Wyoming's, and she felt a surge of something close to gratitude toward the senior Caldwell, this man she had never met, who had been careful enough to make this moment possible. She unwrapped the oilcloth, and there it was, The original survey of the Caldwell Ranch eastern boundary, dated June 1871, filed with the Wyoming Territory Land Office. Signed by 2 surveyors whose names also appeared on the county record, or had appeared, before someone had found a way to alter it. Showing the creek as the boundary, 40 yards east of where the amended record now placed it. She held the document in both hands and felt the particular quality of relief that comes not from safety, but from evidence, from the moment when the truth stops being something you know and becomes something you can prove. "This is it," she said. Nathaniel looked at the document over her shoulder. He was close enough that she could hear him breathe, and the steadiness of his breathing told her that he was doing the same thing she was, holding himself very still while something large moved through him. "He didn't know about these boxes," Nathaniel said quietly. "He didn't know you had a father who kept copies of everything," she said. "He assumed you were like most men. He assumed you trusted the official record because you had no reason not to." He assumed wrong, she agreed. She wrapped the document back in its oilcloth. She held it against her chest with both hands. She looked at Nathaniel in the lamplight of his father's cellar, and she said, "You need a lawyer. Tonight if possible. Tomorrow morning at the absolute latest." "There's a good man in Laramie," he said. "Daniel Marsh. I've used him before. Can you reach him? I can ride tonight." She looked at him. "You've been in the saddle since early morning." "Yes," he said simply. And the way he said it made clear that this was not a consideration that was going to change anything. She thought for a moment. "Send Owen," she said. "He's young and he's fast and he doesn't know enough about this to be scared of it yet. Give him a letter for Marsh explaining what you need and tell him to ride hard." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, then he nodded once. The decisive nod of a man who had made a decision and was done considering alternatives. They came back up from the cellar, and he wrote the letter to Daniel Marsh at his desk in the study while she stood in the doorway, and he wrote it in 15 minutes, which was fast for a man who chose words carefully. He sealed it and handed it to her without explanation, which she understood to mean, "Give this to Owen, because I trust you to do that correctly." She found Owen in the barn. "I need you to ride to Laramie," she said. He looked up from the harness he was mending. He read her face. He put the harness down. "When now?" she said. "As fast as you can get there." "This letter is for Daniel Marsh. He's a lawyer. You'll find his office on the main street. If it's closed, find out where he lives and knock on his door. Tell him it's urgent Caldwell business." Owen took the letter. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Is it bad it's being handled?" she said. Which was what she had told him before, and she watched him recognize the phrase and understand that it meant, yes, it's bad, and no, I'm not going to tell you how bad, and yes, I need you to trust me anyway. "I'll ride hard," he said. "I know you will," she said. He was saddled and out of the yard in 6 minutes, which was fast even for a young man in a hurry. She went back to the kitchen. She made dinner. That was the thing people didn't understand about crisis, she had found. Crisis didn't stop the world. People still needed to eat. The cattle still needed water. The night riders still needed hardtack biscuits and whatever she could pack them in their saddlebags. The work didn't pause for drama, and neither did she, because the work was the thing that kept her from coming apart at the seams when everything else was uncertain. Samuel Briggs appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6, which was not his usual time, and stood there with an expression that told her he knew something was wrong without knowing what specifically. "Owen rode out hard," he said. "Yes," she said. "Caldwell's been in his study since he got back from town." "Is it Harland?" She looked at him. In the weeks she had been here, she had come to understand Samuel Briggs in the way you came to understand any person who expressed themselves primarily through what they didn't say. He was loyal, not to the ranch as an abstract institution, but to the specific people in it, to Nathaniel, and to the memory of Nathaniel's parents, and now, tentatively, carefully, to her. "Yes," she said. He was quiet. "What do you need?" he said. "Right now? For you to eat dinner and get some sleep and be ready tomorrow morning, 'cause tomorrow is going to be a long day." He looked at her with those pale gray eyes. "You know what's happening." "I know enough," she said. "Nathaniel knows more. Between us, we're handling it. He absorbed that. Between us, he repeated slowly, the specific word she had chosen. Yes, she said, and she meant it exactly as directly as it sounded. He nodded. He sat down at the table. He ate the dinner she set in front of him, without another question, and that, she understood, was its own form of trust. A man who had been on this ranch for 22 years, who had seen things come and go, who had learned to wait and watch before he committed to anything, choosing to eat his dinner and trust that the people around him knew what they were doing. It was one of the kindest things anyone had done for her since she arrived. Nathaniel came out of his study at 8, standing at the kitchen counter. She had kept a plate warm and said almost nothing. But he stood near enough to where she was working that his presence was deliberate rather than incidental, and she understood that too. Daniel Marsh is good, he said at one point. Good, she said. He's handled land disputes before, even better. Another long quiet. I should have checked those records years ago, he said. You didn't know there was anything to check, she said. You can't defend against something before you know it's coming. You knew Harland was trouble the first time you saw him. She looked up from what she was doing. I suspected, she said for the third time. Knowing and suspecting are different, and suspecting isn't enough, you need evidence. Now you have it. He was quiet again. Then he said, with something in his voice that she didn't quite have a word for, not exactly gratitude, not exactly apology, but something in between, something more personal than either. I'm glad you were here. She looked at him. He was looking at the wall, not at her, the way people looked at something neutral when they were saying something that mattered. So am I, she said, and meant it with her whole chest. The real fracture came the next morning, before Owen had even returned from Laramie. Dallas Cooper came to the kitchen at 7, which was after breakfast service, which was unusual. And he had the look of a man who had been handed a task he wasn't entirely comfortable with, but had decided to carry out anyway. I need to talk to you, he said, again those exact words. The same opening as before. She felt it differently this time. Go ahead, she said. She did not stop what she was doing. The men are talking, he said, about what's happening with Harland. About what Harland is saying. He paused. He's telling people in town that you've been feeding Caldwell information. That you're working with him to block Harland's expansion. That you've been, he stopped. That I've been what, she said. Manipulating him, Cooper said, and the discomfort on his face told her that he did not entirely believe this, which was interesting. And what do you think, she said. He was quiet. Mr. Cooper, she said, and put down what she was holding and turned to face him fully. I have been in this kitchen for almost 3 weeks. In that time, I have organized the supply room, cut the food waste by more than half, restructured the meal schedule so the night riders eat before they ride, and figured out that someone was altering the county land records to steal the water rights of this ranch. She kept her voice even. Which of those things do you think is manipulation? He stared at her. The land records, he said. You figured that out? Mr. Caldwell figured it out, she said. I helped him see what to look for. Cooper was quiet for a long moment. Why, he said. Not aggressively, genuinely, with the specific confusion of a man who had decided she was a certain kind of person and was now finding the evidence didn't fit. Because I work here, she said. Because the people on this ranch have been decent to me even when they weren't sure what to make of me. Because the right thing to do when you see something wrong is to say so. She paused. And because I know what it looks like when someone with money and power decides to take something from someone who doesn't have the resources to fight back. I've seen it before. I'm not going to watch it happen again and say nothing. Cooper looked at her for a long, complicated moment. Then he said something she had not expected. My father lost his farm the same way, he said. Different territory, different man, same shape. The kitchen was very quiet. I know, she said softly. That's why most of us are here. We're all people who ended up somewhere after losing somewhere else. He swallowed, looked at the floor, looked back up. What can I do, he said. She looked at him steadily. Right now, what you've been doing. Work, be reliable. If anyone asks you about what's happening here, tell them the truth as you know it, which is that this ranch is being run well and the people in it are being taken care of." She paused. "And if Harland or anyone connected to Harland comes onto this property asking questions, you come find me or Mr. Caldwell before you say anything." He nodded. It was a different kind of nod than the ones she had seen from him before. Less like a man performing compliance and more like a man making a decision. He left. She stood in her kitchen for a moment after he walked out, and she let herself feel the specific exhaustion that came from doing 10 things at once while appearing to do only one. The ranch, the food, the supply records, the relationships between the people here, Harlan's scheming, Nathaniel's uncertainty, Owen riding hard through the dark toward Laramie, all of it was moving at the same time. And she was holding all of it in her head simultaneously, and it was heavy. She picked up what she had been doing. There was no alternative. The weight didn't go away because you put things down. It just moved to a different part of your body. Owen came back at noon the following day with Daniel Marsh. She heard the horses in the yard and looked out to see a compact, sharp-eyed man in his 50s dismounting with the efficiency of someone who did not waste movements. He had a leather document case under one arm, an expression of a man who had read a letter, recognized urgency, and arranged his schedule accordingly, without complaint. She made coffee, a lot of it. The meeting happened in Nathaniel's study, which she was not part of, and she did not try to be, because that was not her role in this specific moment. She had done her part, now other people needed to do theirs. But Nathaniel left the study door open. She didn't know if that was deliberate. She suspected it was. From the kitchen, she could hear the shape of the conversation, if not every word. Marsh's voice crisp and methodical, Nathaniel's controlled. The rustle of documents, long silences that felt like reading. Then Marsh's voice, clearly, "This is a serious matter." And then, clearly enough to hear from the kitchen, "But you have the original survey." And then something she couldn't make out. And then Marsh again, "The amendment was filed improperly. The original filing supersedes it. If we move quickly, we can have the amendment set aside before Harlan can challenge it in court." Owen appeared beside her at the work table, eating the lunch she had set out for him, listening to the same sounds she was listening to, with the particular focused expression of a young man who was learning something about how the world actually worked. "Is it going to be okay?" he said quietly. "It looks that way," she said. "Because of you," he said. "Because of Mr. Caldwell's father," she said, "who kept copies of everything in a cedar-lined cellar because he believed that records were worth preserving." She paused. "And because of Mr. Caldwell, who rode to the county office the same morning I asked him to. And because of you, who rode to Laramie in the dark without asking why." She looked at him. "This is not because of me, Owen. This is because a group of people did the right things at the right time." He was quiet for a moment, processing that. "You're going to say it was all of us," he said. "It was all of us," she said. "But you saw it first," he said. "Before any of us. Before Mr. Caldwell." She didn't answer that directly, because it was true, and she was not in the habit of arguing with things that were true just because they were uncomfortable. But she also knew that seeing something first only mattered if the other people around you were willing to act on it, and Nathaniel had been willing, and Owen had been willing, and even Dallas Cooper, in his own slow and resistant way, had come around. That was the thing about trust. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a declaration. It was a series of small moments where people chose to act on what they believed about each other. The real shock came at 3 in the afternoon. Marsh came out of the study and found her in the kitchen, which told her that Nathaniel had said something to him about her, because a lawyer who had been in a house for 2 hours did not generally seek out the cook unless he had a reason. He looked at her with those sharp eyes and said, without preamble, "You identified the amendment discrepancy." "I identified the possibility," she said. "Mr. Caldwell confirmed it at the county office. He says you told him what to look for." "I told him the question to ask," she said. "He asked it." Marsh studied her for a moment. "You understand land records?" I understand what it looks like when land records are used against people who don't know to check them, she said. Where did you learn that? Larimer County, she said. A long time ago. He looked at her for another moment with an expression that was calibrating something, reassessing something, the way a precise man recalculated when new information changed his understanding of a problem. I'm going to need a signed statement from you, he said. About the conversation with Harland on his first visit. Specifically what you observed, what he said, what the circumstances were. She nodded. I can do that, and whatever you can remember about his second visit. Any specific comments about the property boundary? He didn't make any, she said. He was careful. He talked about the grazing value, not the boundary itself. He knew better than to. Restarted. He knew exactly what he was doing. He kept everything he said general enough that it couldn't be used directly. But the timing, she paused, the timing of his offer, 2 weeks after the amendment was filed. That tells a story even without a direct statement. Marsh looked at her. You'd make a good witness, he said. I'd make a truthful one, she said, which isn't always the same thing. The corner of his mouth moved, almost a smile, not quite. No, he agreed, it is not. He went back to the study. She started the dinner preparations. What happened next, the thing she had not planned for? The thing that came from a direction she had been so focused on the Harland problem that she had not been watching carefully enough happened at 5:30 in the evening, when a rider arrived from town. Not a messenger, Margaret Doyle, the wife of the town's most prominent merchant. A woman who occupied the specific social position in this Wyoming town that such women occupied in every frontier settlement, the person whose opinion about other people's respectability carried the most weight. Because she had taken the most care to protect her own. She arrived in a small buggy and asked for Nathaniel, and was shown to the sitting room to wait, and Eliza heard about it from the houseboy, who came to the kitchen looking slightly alarmed, because Mrs. Doyle did not make unannounced calls, and when she did it was generally because something required addressing. She found out the nature of the visit 45 minutes later when Nathaniel appeared in the kitchen doorway, and his expression was different from any she had seen on him before. Not angry, not cold, something carefully, deliberately neutral in a way that required effort. What happened? She said immediately. Mrs. Doyle came to speak to me about you, he said. She put down what she was holding. She has concerns, he said. About your presence here. I know what the concerns are, she said. Harlan's version. Yes. He paused. She also brought a letter. Signed by 6 women in the town, formally requesting that I reconsider your employment. The kitchen was very still. She stood in the center of it and felt the weight of that land on her 6 signatures, 6 women who did not know her, who had heard a story about her, and decided the story was more real than the woman. She had known it was possible. She had told herself she was prepared for it. She had not, she discovered now, been entirely prepared for it. What did you tell her? She said. Her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. I told her that my household was not a matter of town committee, he said, and that the woman working in my kitchen had done more for this ranch in 3 weeks than most employees manage in 3 years. She looked at him. He met her eyes, and there was nothing careful or controlled in his expression now. It was direct and clear, and entirely without the distance he maintained with most people. I also told her, he said, that I was aware of where these rumors were coming from, and that I intended to make that awareness public as soon as my lawyer had completed the necessary documentation. Nathaniel, he has been spreading lies about you specifically to make it easier to take this ranch, he said. The deliberate calm of his voice made it land harder, not softer. He decided that the easiest way to remove the person who had figured out what he was doing was to make the town turn against her. To make me choose between my reputation and my judgment. She was quiet. He miscalculated, Nathaniel said. He might still win, she said. Mrs. Doyle and her letter and the 6 women, that's real pressure. That doesn't go away because you said the right thing in the sitting room. I know, he said. But here's what I've been thinking about since she left. He moved into the kitchen, fully into it, not the doorway. Not the threshold, all the way in and sat down at the work table. My mother ran this kitchen. She ran this house. She had opinions about the ranch finances that my father consulted because she was smarter than him about certain things and he was self-aware enough to know it. She watched him. The town respected her, he said. They respected what she built here. And when she died, what died with her was not just her presence, but the idea of this place as somewhere that cared about people. Not just productivity, not just cattle and land and profit. He looked at the table surface for a moment. You brought that back. I didn't ask you to. You just did it, the way you do everything without announcing it, without asking for acknowledgement. You just worked until the thing existed. The kitchen was very quiet. And I am not going to let a man who has been stealing from smaller ranches for 2 years, who forged official documents, who spread deliberate lies about a woman who has done nothing but her job extraordinarily well. He stopped. I am not going to let that man decide who stays in this house. She looked at him across the work table. She thought about saying something practical. Something about strategy, about how to handle the town's response, about the steps that needed to happen legally before any of this was resolved. She had a dozen practical things she could have said. Instead, she said very quietly, "Thank you." He looked up at her. "For believing me," she said, "before you had proof. When all you had was your own judgment." He held her gaze. "Your judgment earned it," he said. "Mine was just the one willing to act on it." And there it was, the thing between them that had been building for 3 weeks in the quiet of a kitchen. In the language of coffee and honest words, and shared silence and the particular intimacy of two people who had both lost things and learned to be careful with what they had left. Neither of them reached for it yet, but it was there. That evening, after Daniel Marsh had left with his documents and his signed statements and his crisp certainty that the case was winnable, after the hands had eaten and the night riders had gone out, after the ranch had settled into its nightly rhythms, Eliza sat alone in her kitchen and did something she had not allowed herself to do in a long time. She thought about what she wanted, not what she needed. She had been thinking about that for years, calculating needs with the precision of someone who could not afford error. But what she wanted, what this place had become in 3 weeks that she had not expected it to become. She wanted to stay. That was the terrifying truth of it. She had arrived at these gates with nothing, asking only for fair work in exchange for fair wages, telling herself that belonging was a luxury she could not afford to want. And somehow, in the space of 22 days, this kitchen had become the first place in 4 years that felt like something she was building rather than surviving. She heard boots on the back porch. She didn't turn around. Nathaniel came in, set his hat on the hook she had put up for it. She had put it up because he kept setting his hat on the work table, and she had needed the space, but he had started using it without comment. And she thought about that now and poured himself the last of the coffee. The Harlan situation will take about 6 weeks to resolve legally, he said. I know, she said. In the meantime, the rumors will continue. I know. I want you to know that nothing about your position here changes, he said. Not because of Mrs. Doyle, not because of anyone in town. I appreciate that, she said. Then, because she was done being only careful, can I ask you something? Why does this ranch feel lonely, she said. With this many people in it, this much activity, why does it feel like nobody's home? He was quiet for a long time. Because the people here work for the ranch, he said finally. But nobody until you worked for the people. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at his coffee cup. My mother understood the difference. I lost track of it after she died. I thought if the ranch was successful, if everyone was paid fairly, and the cattle were healthy, and the land was maintained, I thought that was enough. It's not enough, she said gently but without apology. No, he said, it's not. He looked up at her then, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, not vulnerable in a way that asked for pity, but open in the way of a man who had decided that a particular kind of honesty was worth more than a particular kind of protection. I don't know how to fix that, he said. I never have. Yes, you do, she said. You've been doing it for 3 weeks. Every time you left that study door open. Every time you came to this kitchen instead of eating alone. Every time you asked my opinion instead of making a decision in isolation. She kept her voice quiet. You already know how. You've just been afraid to keep doing it. The silence between them held something that neither of them was ready to name yet. But it was real. As real as the bread on the shelf, as real as the document in the cellar. As real as the coin she had left in the dirt at the gate on her first day, buried there not because it was worthless, but because she was done measuring her worth in what she could count. Outside, the Wyoming night was enormous and indifferent. Inside, in a kitchen that smelled like something and felt like somewhere, two people sat in the particular quiet of the frontier and held the beginning of something they had both stopped believing was possible. It was fragile. Everything real was fragile at first. But Eliza Whitmore had spent her whole life learning to build careful things in uncertain places, and she was not afraid of fragile. She was only afraid of not trying. The 6 weeks that Daniel Marsh had estimated stretched into 7, and then into 8, and each of those weeks had a different weight to it, the first 2 heavy, with the specific anxiety of waiting. The next 2 grinding with the slow mechanics of legal process, and the final weeks carrying something harder to name, something that felt like a storm that had been building for so long that the air itself had changed quality. Harlan did not stay quiet. She had not expected him to. Men like Victor Harlan did not respond to being caught by going still. They responded by accelerating, by pushing harder, by creating so much noise and motion that the truth got buried under the volume of the argument. She had seen it before. She recognized the pattern the way you recognized a particular kind of weather. The morning after Daniel Marsh's first letter arrived at the county office, formally contesting the amended survey record, a story appeared in the territorial newspaper out of Cheyenne. She did not see it herself. It was Owen who brought it to her, folded carefully in a way that told her he had been deliberating about whether to show her at all. She unfolded it. The story was not about land records. It was not about Victor Harlan. It was about the growing concern among respectable citizens of the Wyoming Territory regarding the influence of persons of uncertain character on the households of prominent ranching families. It did not name her. It didn't need to. He wrote this, she said. Not a question. Or paid someone to, Owen said. Mr. Caldwell thinks Harlan has a connection at the paper. She folded the newspaper back along its original creases and set it on the work table, and stood there with her hands flat on either side of it for a moment, pressing down, feeling the solidity of the wood under her palms. All right, she said. All right, Owen said. He's scared, she said. That's what this is. Men who are winning don't need to do this. Men who are losing try to change the battlefield. She looked up at Owen. Did Mr. Caldwell see this? He's the one who gave it to me, Owen said. What was his reaction? Owen was quiet for a beat. He read it twice, he said, folded it up, set it on his desk. Then he went and found Samuel Briggs and had a conversation I couldn't hear. And afterward, he came back to the house and went into his study, and I could hear him writing for about an hour. Writing what? I don't know. But he sent Pete Larson to Laramie with a sealed envelope at noon. She absorbed that. Nathaniel had acted. He had not come to her first, had not consulted her, had simply read the thing and decided what to do about it, which was, she thought, the behavior of a man who had been operating from a defensive position for weeks and had just decided to stop. Good. She went back to work. But the newspaper story did something she had underestimated. It gave the town's uncertainty a shape. Before it, the rumors about her had been exactly that, rumors, floating and unverifiable, the kind of thing that people passed around in whispers but couldn't quite commit to in full daylight. The story in the paper, vague as it was, gave people a way to talk about it as if it were already established fact. It moved the doubt from the whisper category to the spoken out loud category, which was a different kind of damage entirely. She felt it 2 days later when she went to the supply merchant in town. She had been going to town for supplies since her 3rd week on the ranch, always with Owen driving the wagon, always efficient, always courteous. Always treating the merchant and his staff with the same directness and respect she extended to everyone. They had been fine, professional, Nothing warm but nothing hostile. This time was different. The merchant, a man named Carlyle, who wore his importance in the set of his jaw, looked at her when she came in, and then looked away in a specific manner. Not the casual looking away of a man with things to do. The deliberate looking away of a man who had decided to signal that he had noticed her and chosen not to acknowledge her. She walked to the counter. "I have a supply order for the Caldwell Ranch," she said. He took the paper without looking at her face. "Read it." "Set it on the counter. Some of these items I may not have." "Which ones?" she said. He looked at the list again in a way that took longer than it should have. "The salt, the dried beans, the lamp oil." She looked at him steadily. "You had all of those items in stock last week. I can see 2 of them on the shelf behind you." He looked at the shelf, looked back at her. Something moved across his expression, not shame, exactly, but its distant cousin. The awareness that he was doing something he couldn't quite defend in full daylight. "I may have a prior commitment on those supplies," he said. "Mr. Carlyle," she said, and kept her voice completely even. "I have been purchasing supplies from this store for 6 weeks, on behalf of one of the largest ranches in this territory. The Caldwell Ranch account is paid current, every order. No exceptions." She paused. "I'd like to give you the opportunity to reconsider whether you have a prior commitment on items I can see on the shelf behind you." The store was not empty. There were 2 other women in it, and she was aware of both of them in her peripheral vision, aware of them listening, aware that this moment was being observed, aware that how it resolved would be part of the story people told afterward. Carlyle looked at her for a long moment. He pulled the supplies. He did not meet her eyes once during the transaction, and she did not require him to. She paid the account current, which she always did, and she thanked him, which she also always did, and she and Owen loaded the wagon and drove back to the ranch. Owen was quiet for the first mile. Then he said he was going to refuse to sell to you. "Yes," she said, "because of the newspaper story." "Because of Harland," she said. "The newspaper story is just a tool. Harland is the hand holding it." Another mile of quiet. "Does it bother you," Owen said, "the way they look at you?" She thought about the honest answer. "Yes," she said. "It would bother anyone. Pretending it doesn't is a different kind of defeat." "But you keep going back," he said. "Because stopping would mean he won," she said. "And I did not walk into those gates with nothing, so that a man who has never done an honest thing in his professional life could decide that I don't belong there." Owen was quiet for a while longer. "Then I want to be like you when I figure out what I am," he said. She looked at him sideways. He was staring at the road ahead with the expression of someone who had surprised themselves by saying something true. "You already are it," she said. "You just haven't seen it confirmed enough times to trust it yet." He didn't answer that, but his jaw stopped being so tight. The second major twist came on a Thursday morning, 8 days later, when Daniel Marsh arrived unannounced. Not with a letter sent ahead, not with Owen riding escort. He arrived himself, on a horse he had clearly pushed hard, with road dust on his coat and the expression of a man who had information that could not wait for correspondence. She was the first person he found, because she was the first person who was always there. "Where's Caldwell?" he said. "East fence," she said. "Owen can," Marsh said. "I'll wait." And then he said something that made her blood go cold in a way she had not felt since she pulled that survey document out of the cellar. "I need him and I need you both. There's been a development." She sent the houseboy for Owen, who went for Nathaniel, and she put coffee on. And she stood in her kitchen with her hands busy, and her mind running very fast and quiet through every possibility she could construct for what a development meant, in the context of 8 weeks of legal maneuvering, and an opponent who did not accept the idea of losing. Nathaniel came in 22 minutes later, still in his work clothes, with the particular focused energy of a man who had been interrupted in the middle of something physical and redirected into something that required a different kind of attention entirely. He and Marsh went to the study. The door stayed open. She worked. She heard Harland has filed a counterclaim. She heard He's alleging that the original survey was fraudulent. She heard Nathaniel's voice, very quiet, that's insane. She heard Marsh. He's saying your father bribed the original surveyors. He has a witness. And then she heard nothing for a long time, because the two voices dropped below what she could make out from the kitchen. She kept working. Her hands did not stop. Her mind was doing the thing it did in a crisis, not panicking, not catastrophizing, but moving through possibilities with the same methodical patience she applied to a kitchen that needed reorganizing. She was taking the problem apart into its components. She was asking, what is he actually claiming? What would he need to prove it? What would disprove it? What does a witness mean in this specific context? A witness. Someone who had been there in 1871. Or someone who claimed to have been. The original surveyors had been named on the document in the cellar. She had read their names because she read everything she looked at with that particular attention. William Havers, Thomas Cade. She had not thought about them since because they had not been relevant since. But they were relevant now. The question of whether they were alive and what they would say if they were had just become the most important question on the ranch. She went to the study doorway. Marsh looked up, so did Nathaniel. The original surveyors, she said, William Havers and Thomas Cade. Do you know if they're still living? Marsh stared at her. How do you know those names? He said. I read the document when we found it, she said. I read everything I look at. Marsh and Nathaniel exchanged a glance. Cade died in 1879, Marsh said slowly. Havers, I'm not certain. He was working out of Denver, last I knew. If he's still alive, she said, and if Harland hasn't already gotten to him, his testimony about what the original survey actually showed would disprove the fraud claim. Marsh looked at her with an expression that was past recalibration now and into something more straightforward, the look of a man who had accepted a new fact about the landscape and was working with it. You're right, he said. He looked at Nathaniel. I need to find Havers. How fast? Nathaniel said. Faster than Harland does, Marsh said. The room was quiet for a beat. I'll send 2 men, Nathaniel said. Dallas and Pete. They're fast and they're reliable, and they know enough not to talk about it on the road. Tonight, Marsh said. Tonight, Nathaniel agreed. Marsh left within the hour. Dallas and Pete were saddled and briefed, and gone by 5 in the afternoon with a description of William Havers and Marsh's best information about his last known location in Denver. She packed them enough food for 3 days of hard riding without being asked, because that was the kind of thing that needed doing, and she was the person who knew how to do it. Cooper took his saddlebag from her and looked at her for a moment in the yard. Thank you, he said. It was the first time he had said it to her directly, and without the awkwardness of a man who resented needing to. Come back fast, she said. He nodded and rode. Owen watched them go from the fence and then came to find her. What happens if they can't find Havers, he said. Then we find another way, she said. What other way? She looked at him. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But there's always another way if you're willing to keep looking. She paused. That's not optimism, Owen. That's just the truth about problems. They have more solutions than they look like they do from the front. He chewed on that. She went back to the kitchen and made dinner, and did not allow herself to think about what happened if Dallas and Pete rode to Denver and found nothing. That night, Nathaniel came to the kitchen late. She had become accustomed to this rhythm, the late hour, the coffee, the particular quality of the conversation that happened after the ranch had settled into darkness, and the ordinary pressures of the day had been set aside. He sat at the work table. She sat across from him. She had stopped standing when they talked in the evenings about 3 weeks ago, and neither of them had commented on it. He's going to keep escalating, Nathaniel said. Yes, she said. Even if Marsh finds Havers, even if the counterclaim is dismissed. He's going to find another angle, probably, she said. That doesn't scare you? She looked at him across the table. What scares me, she said carefully, is not the fighting. I've been fighting my whole life, different fights, smaller stakes, but the same essential thing. What scares me is the people here. She paused. Owen. Samuel. Mrs. Holt, even Cooper now. They've built something here, built it around the idea that this ranch is worth staying for. If Harland wins, if he gets the water, controls the creek, it doesn't just hurt you. It changes the lives of every person working on this land. Nathaniel was looking at her, with it that she had come to know, the open, careful look of a man paying close attention. That's why you won't stop, he said. It's not even about you. It's partly about me, she said. I'm honest enough to admit that. I have something here, I'm not ready to give it up. She met his eyes. But it stopped being only about me a long time ago. He was quiet. When I was growing up, he said, my father used to say that the measure of a ranch was not its cattle or its acreage. It was the quality of the people who stayed. He paused. I thought I understood what he meant. I don't think I did until recently. She felt the weight of that, not just the words, but the direction they were pointing. Nathaniel, she said, and using his name still felt like something, even now, something she did not take casually. What happens after this, when it's resolved one way or another? What do you want this place to be? He looked at his hands on the table. What I can't do alone, he said. What it already is when you're in it. The kitchen held that for a moment. That's not a small thing to say, she said quietly. No, he agreed, it's not. She did not answer right away. Not because she didn't know what she felt she had known for some time now. In the careful, honest way she knew most things about herself, but because she was a woman who had learned that the most important things deserved the most honest response, and the most honest response was not always the fastest one. Ask me again, she said, when the fight is over. When we know what we're standing on, she held his gaze. I don't want to build something new in the middle of someone trying to take everything away. I want to build it when I can see the ground. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, the nod of a man who understood and respected and was willing to wait. When the fight is over, he said. The fight took 11 more days. Dallas Cooper and Pete Larson found William Havers in Denver, not in Denver proper, but in a small boarding house in a neighborhood east of the city, where he had retired from surveying 3 years prior, and was living on a modest pension and a vegetable garden he was inordinately proud of. He was 71 years old. He was sharp. He remembered the Caldwell survey of 1,871 with the specific precision of a man who had spent 40 years doing work that required exactness, and when Dallas explained the situation to him, he said, without hesitation, that he would testify. She heard all of this from Owen, who had heard it from Dallas, when the two men rode back in on a Tuesday afternoon, road-worn and dusty, and carrying the energy of people who had been on a mission and completed it. She put food in front of both of them, before they had finished unsaddling, which she brought to the barn, because she had decided that the formality of making them come to the kitchen table could wait. Cooper looked at the plate, looked at her. We found him, he said. Owen told me, she said. Eat, he ate. She stood in the barn doorway and felt the specific release of 8 weeks of tension beginning to loosen in her chest, not all at once, not completely, but enough to breathe differently. He's going to testify, she said. Said it plainly, Pete said around a mouthful of bread. Said he'd been a surveyor for 40 years and had never falsified a record and wasn't about to let someone claim he had. She looked out at the yard. The light was long and golden in the way of Wyoming late afternoons in autumn, and she was aware that the season had turned while she had been in this kitchen, fighting a fight she had not expected to be fighting. And the awareness of time passing had the particular quality of something recovered rather than something lost. Good, she said. That's very good. Marsh filed the responding documents within the week. Havers provided a sworn affidavit from Denver, witnessed and notarized, stating exactly what the original 1,871 survey had shown. A second surveyor, Marsh, had found one independently reviewed both the original document from the seller and the amended county record, and confirmed in writing that the amendment showed signs of deliberate alteration, not clerical error. Harlan's counterclaim collapsed. She did not hear about it from Marsh or from Nathaniel or from anyone official. She heard about it from Mrs. Holt, who had heard it from the wife of one of the county office clerks. which was the way real information traveled in a frontier settlement, not through official channels, but through the network of women who kept track of what was actually happening. "The county has reversed the amendment," Mrs. Holt said. She came into the kitchen specifically to say this, which Mrs. Holt rarely did. She conducted her household duties with efficient independence and did not generally seek out Eliza for conversation, unless something important had happened. "When," Eliza said, "this morning," Mrs. Holt said. "More." She paused. "The county is investigating Harland for the fraudulent filing. And 2 of the smaller ranch owners he's been pressuring have come forward. They're saying he did the same thing to their records." The kitchen was very quiet. "He did it before," Eliza said. "Yes," Mrs. Holt said. "This wasn't the first time. It was just the first time someone had the original documents to prove it." She stood in her kitchen and thought about the 6 women who had signed a letter asking for her removal. She thought about the merchant who had tried to refuse to sell her salt. She thought about the newspaper story that had not named her, but had been aimed at her with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. She thought about her father. She thought about the farm in Larimer County that was someone else's land now, farmed by someone else's hands, its name erased from the records that mattered. She thought, this is not enough. Harland being investigated, the records restored, the ranch protected, none of that gave her family their land back. None of it returned what had been taken from people who had no document in a cellar to prove what was theirs. But it was something, and she had learned to be honest about the value of something when nothing was the alternative. The thing she had not anticipated was the town. She had expected the legal resolution to travel the same route the rumors had, slowly, imprecisely, filtered through the particular distortions of a community that preferred a simple story to a complicated truth. She had steeled herself for weeks more of careful looks and deliberate silences, and the specific exhaustion of existing in a place that had decided what it thought of her before it knew her. What she had not expected was Margaret Doyle. The woman arrived 3 days after the county's reversal, again unannounced, again in her small buggy, again asking for Nathaniel. But this time she asked specifically if she could also speak to Miss Whitmore. Eliza came to the sitting room with the same thing. She always brought coffee and whatever was fresh from the kitchen and sat down in a chair across from Margaret Doyle, who looked at her with the expression of a woman who had been wrong in a public way and was deciding how to manage it. "I want to tell you," Doyle said, "that the letter I sent to Mr. Caldwell was a mistake." Eliza said nothing. "I believed information that I should have verified," Doyle said. "I have prided myself for 30 years on being a woman who does not act on gossip. And I acted on gossip." "You acted on what you were told by a credible source," Eliza said. "Harland is credible. He spent years building that credibility specifically so that people would accept what he said without checking." Doyle looked at her. "You're being generous. I'm being accurate," Eliza said. "There's a difference." A pause. "The women who signed the letter," Doyle said. She paused. "We feel that an apology is owed." "The women who signed the letter don't know me," Eliza said. "What they owe me is the same thing I'd ask of anyone. Judge what you actually see, not what you're told to see." She kept her voice even. "I don't need an apology, Mrs. Doyle. I need this territory to be the kind of place where a woman with nothing can work hard, judged by that work, and not by the stories men with motives tell about her." Doyle was quiet for a long moment. "You're right," she said. It was not a comfortable thing for her to say, and she said it anyway, which told Eliza something real about the woman beneath the position. "I know I'm right," Eliza said. "So do you." There was a pause that held something fragile. Then Doyle said, "I would like to start again, if you're willing." Eliza looked at her. She thought about what her mother would have said. She thought about what was practical, what was generous, what was true. "I've found," she said, "that starting again is usually the only reasonable thing to do." It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was the door left open, which was close enough to begin with. Nathaniel found her in the kitchen afterward. "How did it go?" he said. "Better than I expected," she said. "She's a decent woman who made a mistake." "Those exist." You're more forgiving than I am, he said. I'm more practical, she said. Carrying grievances cost energy I need for other things. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Marsh sent word this morning. The county investigation is expanding. They're looking at 5 other properties Harlan touched. Good, she said. And Harlan's lawyer told Marsh that Harlan is considering leaving the territory. She stopped what she was doing. Leaving, she said. Apparently, when the legal ground shifts this significantly, men like him prefer a different territory. One where the records haven't been scrutinized yet. She stood still for a moment. She thought about the smaller ranchers who had been pressured. The families, the ones who hadn't had a cellar full of carefully preserved documents. The ones who had lost things that were not going to be recovered just because Victor Harlan relocated his ambitions. He shouldn't be allowed to just leave, she said. Marsh is working on it, Nathaniel said. The county is working on it. There are limits to what we can force legally, but there are also limits to how far a man with active investigations against him can comfortably travel. She nodded. It was not the answer she wanted, but she had lived long enough to know that justice was rarely as clean as righteous anger wanted it to be. You took what you could get, and you worked with it. Nathaniel, she said. He looked at her. The fight is over, she said. He went very still. She had not planned to say it like that, not standing in her kitchen with flour on her hands and a practical conversation still technically in progress. But she had also learned that waiting for the perfect moment was a way of waiting forever, and she was done waiting for things she had already decided. He looked at her across the work table. The fight is over, he said slowly, as if testing the weight of the words. And then understanding moved across his face, the specific, careful understanding of a man who remembered exactly what those words had been attached to, what she had said to him in this kitchen weeks ago, in the long quiet of a late night. Ask me again when the fight is over. Yes, he said. Very quietly. Then ask me, she said. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that was doing the same thing she was, which was checking. Is this real? Is this what I think it is? Am I standing on solid ground or on something that will shift? And then he said, simply and directly, and without any of the performance that people sometimes use to make this kind of moment seem larger than it was, will you stay? Not, will you marry me? Not, will you be mine? Not any of the complicated formulations that men used when they were trying to manage the response they got. Just, will you stay? She understood in the way she understood most things about this man that he knew exactly what he was asking. He was asking whether she would choose this not out of necessity, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because this was the place she wanted to build in. Yes, she said. It was such a small sound. But she had come to understand that Nathaniel Caldwell expressed large things in small sounds, and that this one held everything he did not yet have the words for: relief and gratitude, and something warmer and more personal than either of those. I need to tell you something, he said. All right. I haven't been thinking clearly since about the 3rd week, he said. He stopped. Since I came into the kitchen at midnight and you were making bread, and you said that thing about what makes a place a home. She remembered. She remembered exactly. I have been trying very hard, he said, to be appropriate. To be your employer. To not, he paused. To not complicate your position here with things you didn't ask for. I know, she said softly. Was I doing it wrong, he said. And the slight uncertainty in his voice, from a man who was never uncertain about anything, made something in her chest do something she was going to have to find a better word for eventually. No, she said. You were doing it exactly right. A person can only accept what they're ready to hold. She looked at him steadily. I'm ready now. He came around the work table. He stood in front of her close enough that she could see the gray in his temples and the lines around his eyes that were the map of every difficult year and hard decision that had made him the person standing in front of her. He took her hand, not dramatically, not with the sweeping gestures of the stories people told about this kind of moment. Just took her hand the way a person takes something they intend to hold carefully. You arrived at my gate with a cloth bag and nothing else, he said. And you changed everything. You opened the gate, she said. Barely, he said. I almost didn't hire you, I know, she said. I could tell. That's why I told you about the flour barrel. He almost laughed. She caught the full weight of it this time, not the edge she'd glimpsed before, but the real thing, rare and unguarded and entirely genuine. The flour barrel, he said. It worked, she said. It did, he agreed. They stood in her kitchen, his kitchen, their kitchen, the kitchen that smelled like something and felt like somewhere, and held each other's hands, and outside the Wyoming territory was doing what it always did, vast and cold and indifferent. And inside this room, two people who had both lost everything and kept working had found something neither of them had been brave enough to plan for. Samuel Briggs appeared in the kitchen doorway. He stopped. He looked at both of them with those pale gray eyes. Then he said very quietly, "Well, about time," and he turned around and walked back out. Eliza looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at her. They were both for once entirely without words, and the kitchen was warm and quiet and real. Samuel Briggs did not mention what he had seen in the kitchen doorway. Not that evening at dinner, not the following morning, not in the days after. He simply went back to his work with the same unhurried steadiness he applied to everything, and if something had shifted in the way he looked at both of them, a slight softening around the eyes. Quality of quiet satisfaction, he kept it contained, with the dignity of a man who understood that some things were not his to announce. But the ranch knew, not because anyone said anything. Ranches were like that, living organisms with their own intelligence, made up of people who spent their days in close proximity and had learned to read small signals the way experienced hands read weather. The morning after what had happened in the kitchen, Owen came in for breakfast and looked at Eliza's face and looked at Nathaniel's, and then looked very carefully at the ceiling for a moment before sitting down and eating with a focused concentration that was entirely unlike his usual restlessness. Dallas Cooper came in behind him and did the same calculation and then said, to no one in particular, "Good morning," in a voice that was carefully, scrupulously neutral, and therefore communicated everything. She served breakfast. She did not explain herself. She did not feel she owed anyone an explanation, which was a feeling she had earned through every day of the past 10 weeks and intended to keep. Nathaniel came in at 6:30, which was earlier than usual. Poured his own coffee, which he had stopped doing weeks ago because she always had it ready, and then caught himself and looked at her with an expression of slight embarrassment that was, she thought, one of the most human things she had ever seen on his face. The coffee was already ready, she said. I know, he said. Old habit, put the cup back, she said. Sit down. He sat down. Owen made a sound that was technically a cough. Dallas Cooper took a very long drink of his coffee and looked at the wall. She set Nathaniel's cup in front of him and went back to the stove and kept working, and the kitchen moved through its morning rhythms the way it always did, and something in the room was different and everyone knew it, and no one needed to say so. That was the first morning. The days that followed had a different quality than anything that had come before, not easier exactly, because the ranch was a ranch, and the work did not change its nature because the emotional weather had improved. But there was a solidity to things, a sense of ground underfoot. The particular steadiness that comes when two people have said the true thing and have not yet had time to be afraid of it. Nathaniel was different in ways she noticed and cataloged without trying to. He came to the kitchen more, he stayed longer. He asked her opinions on ranch matters that he would previously have decided in isolation, not because he lacked the ability to decide, but because he had discovered that decisions made in conversation were usually better than decisions made alone. And she had become the person he thought out loud with. She was different too, though she was slower to admit it. She had been carrying a particular alertness since she arrived, the hypervigilance of a person in an uncertain position, always reading the room, always calculating the distance between where she stood and where the exit was. She had not realized how heavy that was until it started to lift. She still read rooms, she still calculated, but she was no longer doing it from the position of someone who expected to be asked to leave. She was doing it from the position of someone who lived there. That shift from visitor to inhabitant, from employee to something that did not yet have a clean name happened slowly, and then suddenly, the way most real changes happened. And with it came things she had not anticipated. The first thing she had not anticipated was the grief. It came on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after the legal resolution, on an ordinary morning with nothing dramatic in it. She was organizing the spice cabinet, something she had been meaning to do for weeks, and she found, pushed to the very back of the top shelf, a small tin canister that she didn't recognize. She opened it. Inside was dried lavender, old, mostly past its useful life for cooking, but still faintly fragrant. And on the inside of the lid, in a careful handwriting she had never seen before, someone had written, "For the bread." MC Margaret Caldwell, Nathaniel's mother. She stood with the tin in her hands, and the grief hit her not for Margaret Caldwell, whom she had never met, but for her own mother and her own lost kitchen, and the farm in Larimer County, where she had learned to cook and learned to work, and learned that the people you loved could disappear so fast that you didn't have time to memorize them properly before they were gone. She had not cried since she arrived. She had not allowed it, the same way she had not allowed herself to want things she wasn't sure she could keep it, had been a form of self-protection, rational and necessary. She stood alone in the kitchen with a dead woman's lavender tin, and she cried for about 4 minutes, which was all she was going to give it, and then she dried her face and put the tin on the counter where she could see it and went back to work. Nathaniel found it there that afternoon and stopped. He picked it up. He looked at it for a long moment. He set it back down without speaking. "I found it in the back of the top shelf," she said. "I didn't know it was still there," he said. "She put lavender in her bread." Sometimes, he said, when she felt like it, he paused. When she wanted to make something feel like a celebration, even when there was no occasion for one. She looked at the tin. "Can I use it?" she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said, and the word had more in it than just permission. That Sunday she made bread with lavender. Just a small amount, barely perceptible, the way good additions worked present in the feeling of a thing without announcing themselves. She set it on the table at the midday meal without comment. Samuel Briggs took one bite and went completely still. He sat there for a moment with his hands flat on the table. Then he said, very quietly, to no one in particular, "Well, I'll be." She did not explain it. He did not ask. But for the rest of that meal, he ate with the careful attention of a man revisiting something he had thought was gone for good. And afterward he came to the kitchen doorway, his usual position for their conversations, and said, "Her recipe?" "My instinct. Her lavender." He nodded slowly. "Same result," he said. "Close enough," she said. He looked at her with those pale gray eyes that had evaluated her from her first week and had been quietly, steadily revising their assessment ever since. "She would have said you've got good hands," he said. That was the highest compliment she gave. Eliza held that carefully. "Thank you, Samuel," she said. She used his given name deliberately, and he registered a slight straightening, the way a person stood a little taller when called by the name that meant something, rather than the one that placed them. He went back to work. She stood in her kitchen and felt something settle into place that had been hovering just slightly out of position for 10 weeks. The second thing she had not anticipated was Victor Harlan's final move. She had assumed he was finished. The county investigation was active. Daniel Marsh had confirmed that 2 of the smaller ranchers were pursuing civil claims. Harlan had gone quiet, the particular quiet of a man managing his position, calculating his options, deciding which losses he could survive. She had underestimated him. Not his power, she had never underestimated that. But his willingness to make things personal when legal avenues were closing. He came to the ranch one last time on a Tuesday morning in November, when the air had the specific cold bite that meant winter was making its intentions clear. She heard the horse in the yard and looked out and felt the familiar tightening the weather sense that had never once been wrong about this man. She went to find Nathaniel before Harlan had dismounted. "He's here," she said. Nathaniel looked up from the ledger he was working on. His expression went through several things in quick succession and settled on something she recognized as decision. "I'll handle it," he said. "I know you will," she said. "I'm not asking to come with you. I'm asking you to know what he's going to say before he says it." Nathaniel looked at her. "What is he going to say?" "He's going to make you an offer," she said. "He's going to frame it as a way out for both of you. He's going to suggest that the investigation goes away, that the civil claims go away, that all of it goes away if you agree not to testify and if you remove the influence that identified his scheme in the first place." Nathaniel was very still. "He's going to ask you to let him go," she said, "in exchange for removing me." Silence. "That's what this has been building to," she said. "He's not going to attack the legal case directly anymore, because he can't. But if he can remove the person who built it—" "No," Nathaniel said. It came out flat and immediate, before she had even finished the sentence, with the quality of a word that had been decided long before this moment and needed no deliberation. "Hear him out," she said. "Don't refuse before you know exactly what he's offering. You need to know the full shape of it." He looked at her. "You're telling me to listen to an offer you know I won't accept." "I'm telling you to listen so that what he says is on record," she said. "So that when this goes to court, and it will go to court, everyone knows that he came here and attempted to obstruct justice by bribing a witness." She paused. "Owen can stand near the window. He doesn't have to be visible. But he should be close enough to hear." Nathaniel stared at her for a moment. "You thought all of this through," he said. "I've been thinking about it since he went quiet," she said. "Quiet men with Harlan's resources don't go quiet because they've given up. They go quiet because they're changing tactics." He stood. He straightened his coat. He looked at her, with an expression that she was becoming more fluent in reading gratitude, respect, and something warmer than either, all held in the particular stillness of a man who did not perform his feelings, but who felt them considerably. "Find Owen," he said. She found Owen. She positioned him near the side window of the front room, with instructions to listen and remember exactly what he heard. Owen nodded with the seriousness of a young man who understood that he had been given a real responsibility and was not going to treat it as anything less. She went back to the kitchen. She worked. Harlan was in the front room for 40 minutes. She could hear the voices, not the words, but the shape of the conversation, the rhythms of it. Harlan's voice easy and unhurried at first, then slightly less so, then acquiring an edge that she recognized as the sound of a man realizing his calculation was wrong. Nathaniel's voice steady throughout, lower, giving nothing. The front door opened and closed. She heard a horse leave the yard at a pace that expressed something clearly. Owen appeared in the kitchen doorway approximately 90 seconds later, with the expression of someone carrying news of significant weight. "He offered exactly what you said," Owen said, almost word for word. "And Mr. Caldwell told him that any further communication should go through Daniel Marsh." Owen paused. "He also told him that the conversation had been witnessed and would be reported to Marsh in full." Another pause. Harlan's face did something I don't have words for. "I can imagine," she said. Owen said. Is that the end of it?" She thought about the honest answer. "It's enough to significantly narrow his options," she said. "Whether it's the end depends on what he does next and what the county decides to do with the investigation." She looked at Owen steadily. "But he came here today because he was desperate. Desperate men make mistakes. And when they make mistakes in front of witnesses," she left it there. Owen thought about that. "We work," she corrected. "There's a difference." He almost smiled. "You always say that." "Because it's always true," she said. "Go write down everything you heard. Exactly as you remember it. Bring it to me and I'll help you put it in a form that Marsh can use." He went. She turned back to the stove. Her hands were completely steady. The next twist was one she saw coming and still felt in her chest when it arrived. 3 days after Harlan's final visit, Daniel Marsh sent a letter. She knew it was significant before Nathaniel read it aloud to her, because she had learned to read the weight of envelopes in the way you learn to read the weight of silences, not perfectly, but often enough to be useful. Marsh's letter informed them that the county investigation had expanded to include evidence of Harlan's manipulation of at least 7 property records across 3 counties over 6 years. That 2 of the affected families were now part of the formal investigation, and that the territorial court was issuing a summons for Victor Harlan to appear before a judge within 30 days. That was the legal news. The personal news came in the last paragraph. It was addressed specifically to Eliza Whitmore. She read it herself, standing at the kitchen table with Nathaniel across from her. Marsh wrote that in the process of the investigation, the county had reviewed records from Larimer County at the territory's request. That a pattern of manipulation similar to Harlan's had been identified in records dating from the late 1870s. And that while full restitution was not yet possible, the territory was opening an inquiry into properties that may have been improperly seized during that period. She read that paragraph twice. Then she put the letter down. Nathaniel was watching her. She was quiet for a long moment, not the controlled quiet of someone managing their reaction, but the genuine quiet of someone who has been hit by something unexpected and needs a moment to take its full measure. "Larimer County," she said. "Yes," he said. She stopped. "I know," he said. It was not a promise of her family's land return. She was clear-eyed enough to know that property once sold and resold and settled did not simply revert because an inquiry opened. And the practical reality of what restitution actually meant for families like hers was complicated and uncertain and would likely take years. She knew all of that, but someone had looked. Someone, as a direct result of what had happened here, on this ranch, in this kitchen, had looked at records that had been accepted as final for years and asked whether they were actually true. That was not nothing. That was in fact enormous. "Are you all right?" Nathaniel said. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright in a way she was not going to apologize for. "Yes," she said, yes." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held his. "It might not lead to anything," she said. "It might," he said. "The land is gone, too many transfers." "Maybe," he said. "But the record is wrong, and now someone official knows the record is wrong. That's different from nothing." She looked at him. "You asked Marsh to look," she said. "It was not a question." He was quiet for a moment. "I told him what you told me," he said. "About Larimer County, about the shape of what happened to your family. I asked him if the pattern was similar enough to be worth examining." He paused. "I didn't tell you, because I didn't want to give you something to hope for that might not come to anything." She was quiet. She said, "That was." She stopped. Started again. "Don't thank me," he said. "You are the reason any of this was looked at. You are the reason the records exist at all. The least I could do was point someone in the right direction." She held his hand and sat in the kitchen that smelled like lavender bread and bone broth and the specific warmth of a place where people had decided to take care of each other, and she let herself feel, fully and without reservation, what it meant to have done something that mattered beyond herself. Her mother had told her, in a kitchen much smaller than this one, on a farm that no longer existed on any official record, good work goes further than you can see. You plant it and you don't always get to watch it grow. But it grows. She had believed it then. She had tried to believe it through the years of losing everything. She believed it now, fully, in her body and her chest and her hands that had built this from the day she walked through those gates, with nothing but her skill and her refusal. The wedding was small. She had not wanted anything large. Large things had never interested her, and the extravagance of ceremony had always seemed to her like a way of performing something that should simply be true. Nathaniel had agreed without needing to be convinced, which was one of many things she had come to love about him. He did not perform. They were married in November, 3 weeks after Marsh's letter, in the front room of the ranch house, with Daniel Marsh as witness and Mrs. Holt weeping quietly into a handkerchief she had borrowed from Samuel Briggs, who was standing next to her with the expression of a man maintaining his dignity under significant emotional pressure. Owen Mercer stood in the back of the room with his hat in his hands and cried openly and did not seem remotely embarrassed about it. Dallas Cooper stood beside him and stared at the ceiling and blinked rapidly, and later told everyone who asked that he had something in his eye. Margaret Doyle, who had been invited because Eliza had decided that the right response to someone who had made a mistake and owned it was to give them the opportunity to do better, sat in the front row and held herself with the particular dignity of a woman who understood that she was being given something she hadn't entirely earned and intended to be worth it. When it was done, when the words had been said and the paper signed, and Nathaniel had looked at her with that open, unguarded expression that she thought of as the real face under the controlled one, she stood in her front room, her room now, and felt the specific solidity of a life that was actually finally hers. Not given, built. The months that followed were the months of becoming. Eliza took on the household accounts formally in January, not because Nathaniel couldn't manage them, but because she was better at it, and they had both stopped pretending otherwise. She identified two long-standing inefficiencies in the ranch's supply chain that had been costing them money for years without anyone noticing, and she fixed them the same way she fixed everything, methodically, without announcement, until the problem simply no longer existed. She hired a kitchen assistant in February, a girl of 16 named Clara, daughter of one of the smaller ranchers in the area, whose family needed the wages and who had the specific quality Eliza valued most in a person. She paid attention. Eliza taught her the same way she had been taught, which was by letting her do things and correcting what went wrong and explaining the why behind every instruction, because a person who understood why did not need to be told twice. In March, two things happened. The first was that Victor Harland appeared before the territorial court and was found liable for the fraudulent amendment of land records in 3 counties. He was ordered to pay restitution to 7 affected property owners. His legal challenges consumed most of his liquid assets. By summer, the Harland Ranch east of the Caldwell property would be sold at significantly reduced value to settle his debts, and the new owners would be one of the families he had spent 6 years trying to displace. She heard about it from Owen, who heard about it from Pete Larson, who had been in town the day the judgment came through, and the way Owen told it, standing in her kitchen doorway, practically vibrating with the satisfaction of it, made her think that justice, when it finally moved completely. "He's done," Owen said. "He made himself done," she said. "We just refused to get out of the way." The otsic thing that happened in March was that an official letter arrived from the Larimer County Recorder's Office in Colorado. She opened it at the kitchen table, alone, early in the morning before anyone else was up. The letter informed her that the Territory of Colorado, following the investigation opened by the Wyoming Territorial Inquiry, had reviewed the seizure records of Whitmore family property dated 1880 through 1882. That irregularities had been found in the documentation supporting the foreclosure. That while the property itself had changed hands through subsequent legitimate sales and could not be returned, the territory was prepared to offer financial restitution to surviving members of the original Whitmore family, calculated against the assessed value of the property at the time of seizure. She read the letter through once. She set it down. She put her hands flat on the table. She stared at the wall. Her parents were gone. Her siblings scattered, most of them surviving but none of them ever having fully recovered from what losing the farm had done to a family that had been built on it. The land itself was someone else's and always would be. But the record was corrected. Someone with authority had looked at what had been done to her family and written down in an official document that it had been wrong. Her mother had worked that land for 20 years. Her father had broken his body on it. And somewhere in the official record of Colorado Territory, the word wrong now existed next to their name. She allowed herself to cry for 8 minutes this time. Then she dried her face, and she made the coffee, and when Nathaniel came into the kitchen, she handed him the letter without speaking. She watched him read it. She watched his face. When he looked up, there was something in his eyes that she recognized because she had seen it once before, in her own mirror, on the morning she had decided to stop being a person who only survived and start being a person who built. "Eliza," he said. "I know," she said. "This doesn't give it back." "No," she said. "But it's the truth, on record." She met his eyes. "My mother used to say that when you're poor and powerless, the most dangerous thing that can happen to you is for your story to disappear. For the wrong thing to become the official version." She paused. "It doesn't disappear anymore." He came around the table and put his arms around her, and she let him, and she stood in her kitchen with her face against his shoulder and felt the full weight of what the past year had cost and given, all of it at once, without flinching. Owen came in 7 minutes later and stopped dead in the doorway. He looked at both of them. He looked at the letter on the table. He looked back at them. "Good news," he said quietly. "The real kind," she said. "The kind that comes late and costs something and is worth more for both." He nodded slowly, in the way of someone who was filing that away for later, for the years ahead when he would need to remember that things worth having did not always arrive on schedule. She detached herself from Nathaniel gently. She smoothed her apron. She moved to the stove. "Sit down," she said, "both of you." "Breakfast is ready." They sat. She cooked. The kitchen smelled like coffee and bread, and the dried lavender she kept on the shelf in its tin. Margaret Caldwell's tin with the handwriting inside the lid, which had become her talisman. Her reminder of the woman who had built this place before her, and the line of care that ran from those hands to these ones. By the time April came, Caldwell Ranch had a different reputation in the territory. Not because the cattle were better, or the land had expanded, or the finances had improved, though all of those things were also true. The reputation had changed because of something harder to quantify and more durable than any of them. People talked about the ranch the way they talked about places where the specific quality of the management could be felt by anyone who came through the gate. Hands stayed. The turnover that had plagued every department of the ranch before she arrived had simply stopped, not because conditions were dramatically different, but because people could feel, the moment they walked into that kitchen and were fed a real meal and spoken to like their presence mattered, that this was a place that knew what it had. Samuel Briggs, who had spent 22 years surviving the management of the ranch rather than thriving in it, told a younger hand one afternoon within Eliza's earshot, which she suspected was not accidental, that in all his years he had only seen two people who understood what a ranch actually was. The hand asked who. "Nathaniel's mother," Samuel said. "And the woman running that kitchen." She pretended not to hear it. She heard every word. Owen Mercer became, over the course of that year, something she had not set out to create but recognized when she saw it forming a young man who was learning what it meant to pay attention to people rather than just circumstances. He started showing up early, not because he was asked to, not because it was required, but because he had learned, in the way young people learn the things that matter, that presence was a form of investment, and investment in people returned more than any other kind. She watched this happen and said nothing about it directly, because the right way to tend to something growing was not to announce it, but to make sure the conditions stayed favorable. Dallas Cooper, who had been her most resistant audience from the first morning, became the person she trusted most with the supply runs. Not because he had changed, he was still blunt, still direct, still occasionally difficult in the way of people who expressed their integrity through stubbornness rather than charm. But precisely because of those things, he did not perform his reliability. He simply was it consistently, in the way that mattered most. She gave him more responsibility without making a speech about it. He took it without making a speech about it. That was, she thought, a very good working relationship. Spring turned the ranch into something new. Not physically, she did not deal in the physical beauty of landscape, had learned not to just childhood that beautiful sensuous land was only beautiful until someone decided it was valuable. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the place, the way you could feel a room change when the people in it stopped bracing against each other and started moving in the same direction. One evening in late April, she and Nathaniel sat on the back porch after everyone else had gone to bed, a habit they had developed over the winter, this particular kind of quiet at the end of the day. The Wyoming night was enormous above them. The cattle were settled. The ranch was as close to at peace as a working ranch ever got. "Do you remember what you said to me?" he said that first night. "The thing about food." She knew what he meant. Good food is not about making people impressed, she said. It's about making people feel they're not forgotten. "Yes," he said, "I meant it, I know you did." He was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about it a lot. About what you built here. Not the legal fight, not the supply records or the kitchen management, though. All of that matters. I mean the other thing, the thing that made Samuel Briggs smile at a breakfast table after 3 years of not smiling. The thing that made Owen think he was worth taking seriously. The thing that made Dallas Cooper decide that being reliable was worth something." She was quiet. "You made people feel they weren't forgotten," he said. "That's exactly what you did, to every person on this ranch. Including me." He paused. "Especially me." She looked at him in the dark. This man who had owned thousands of acres and hundreds of cattle and a large empty house, and had been, beneath all of it, as alone as she had been in a different and less visible way. "You weren't hard to see," she said. "You just needed someone to look at the right thing." And what was the right thing? "The man who came into the kitchen at midnight because he didn't want to eat alone," she said. Not the rancher, not the landowner, the person. He was quiet. She reached across and took his hand. They sat in the dark on the porch of the ranch that had become a home genuinely, functionally, fully a home, and the territory spread out around them, vast and cold and entirely indifferent. And inside the warmth of the life they had built together, none of that indifference touched them. Years later, when people asked Nathaniel Caldwell what had changed the ranch, what had taken a successful but hollow operation and made it into something people talked about in the same breath as the best run, most respected spreads in Wyoming, he always gave the same answer. Not the legal victory over Harland, not the expanded supply chain, not the financial management that had quietly and consistently improved every metric the ranch tracked. He said, "A woman walked through my gate with nothing but a cloth bag and a refusal to be less than she was. She cooked a meal and said something true about it. And everything that came after, every person who stayed, every fight we won, every morning this place felt like somewhere worth being came from that." Eliza, when she heard him say this, which he said often and without embarrassment, always corrected him on one point. She said, "I walked through your gate with my skill, my judgment, and 26 years of hard-won knowledge about what it costs to build something real. That is not nothing. That has never been nothing," and she was right. She had arrived with everything that mattered. It had simply taken the right place, and the right man, and the right fight, and the right kitchen to make all of it visible. She had not been found, she had not been saved. She had walked through a gate, buried her last coin in the dirt, and built something that outlasted every person who had doubted her, every hand that had laughed, every story told to make her small. That was the only story that was ever true, and it was entirely, completely, permanently hers.